All right, welcome everyone. All right, the today we're continuing with a tool that's going to help you do an even better job with knowing what's true, gaining understanding, using uh, the most basic idea of the law of implication, which is that we want to focus on what we can know and build from there. And generally, we can just keep doing that. Um, and that I'll just say it kind of verbally here, but I have some slides that I'll get to on it. Uh, but our and also, so today's Saturday. We'll have Monday, and on today and the next time, I'll continue to show you techniques about more of my method of how to know what's true, or the method of how to know what's true that I have uncovered as much as I've uncovered. And then I think we'll spend the next two times after that taking a look at more of the way our brain works by default with some kind of inevitable illusions that it creates. I've referred to the idea of successive approximation, how it associates, how it goes about things. So that's tentatively what I'm thinking of doing right now. And everything we're doing is filling in or getting ready, but in actuality, I think people are making a lot of progress in there with the things you're working on in your lives, either personally and also with your business. Um, but what I was going to say is that what we'll see is by default, the way our brain is set up is and you can spot yourself looking to do this from time to time or often, is it, especially if we need to move forward in order for our goals, right? We want to progress our goals, so we can't be questioning the model that we have in general, the context, the foundation, our own self-image, right? And even whether or not the goal that we're going after is what we want. We All of that stuff, it might be a gray area, but what our brain likes to do is to sort of impose black and white on the gray. Oh, lots of good mornings. I like starting out this way. Um, but so we want to see how, by default, our brain wants to, again, impose black and white on gray, but not by discovering it, just by kind of forcing it and kind of pushing. And that's going to sometimes create either more tension for ourselves. Other times it's just going to keep us from seeing what's correct, and we're going to go after something that or set up a goal so that it's going to mess us up, and then reality starts to intrude more and more on what we're doing, and it creates more problems for ourselves and so forth. Um, and basically the false feeling of overconfidence when our brain is trying to impose black and white without discovering it properly, but just imposing it, not even stipulating it. When we stipulate, um, like let's say if we're going after whatever goal that we're going after, um, we might not be sure that that's the right goal to go after, like ideally, and we could say, well, I'm just going to stipulate it is for the next week or whatever time frame or until we get new information. That's fine because you're saying that in that case you're acknowledging it's gray, and then you're looking for the black and white. And it is black and white if you can just say, look, I'm just going to admit I don't know for sure, but I'm going to stipulate it for now. But our brain actually, by default, doesn't do it that way. Instead, it gives us a sort of feeling and sort of mental model trying to make us think that it just is true, period, right? So, okay, just with that little verbal start, let me go to my slides here and let's see where we want to start. I'm going to quickly refer back to the previous slide. So we're learning in this phase 2.5, we can call it, of alchemy. I wanted to quickly show also Bolton's great post, just to also show I think everyone's feeling this, and that's the feedback I'm getting anyway, but really seeing, it's interesting how with the foundational ideas that we're building, that people are taking this and using it to directly make more money, right? In Bolton's great post, he wrote, hello all, I'm here checking in with a new update. My business partner Connor and I have been wanting to hit the $10,000 a month milestone for quite some time. We have had sort of come close in the past, but wrong underlying foundations in ourselves help prevent this reality from manifesting. And by the way, Bolton was actually at Mike Long's place. He lived somewhere else, but he was down in LA and he visited Mike. And Mike told him, Mike gave him the oath, Mike, you got to do alchemy pitch, and he quite strongly in a fun, in a good way. And whoops, scrolled a little too far. But Bolton said we were simply neglecting the very thing that would end up benefiting us in the long run, which was David's Law of Implication and Alchemy series. What led to this realization came from a breakthrough experience we had while speaking with Mike all along. Mike told us exactly what we needed to hear, and I'll always be thankful for that experience. I stopped getting on Facebook as much, began to take, except for during our discussions, right? And began to take building my foundation seriously. On a side note, by March of this year, I'd finished every training module OMG offered. So that was about 4 months ago, right? So lack of SEO knowledge was not holding me back at all. Personally, as soon as I began diving into alchemy with purpose, a little over 1 month ago, I noticed immediate unconscious changes in my thoughts and behavior patterns. Connor also experienced the same. It was not alarming at all, to say the least. Rather, I welcomed it with open arms. Of course, now what I'm reading doesn't apply to you guys, but if you've been neglecting David's material, I strongly encourage you to dive in. It will only help benefit you both in the short and long run. Right, that's the interesting thing, is that at first Bolton referred to the long run, but it ended up helping him within a month, right? Now, absolutely, that's in combination with having the right knowledge and information from many other people that is critical and necessary. At which he points out. I encourage you to seek more understanding when it comes to experiencing overall goodness, and LOI can help you see the light more clearly. They surpassed the 10K goal and made it to 14K. He graduated from college less than 5 months ago, and I'm already making way more money than many of the peers I graduated with. While I attribute the breakthroughs that helped lead to this outcome to law of implication and alchemy, of course, it also would not have been possible without the help of Gregory, Ortiz, Cotton, Stephen, Greg, Morrison, Joshua, and Joseph along the way. And then he gave some screenshots with results. So thank you for that, Bolton. And just to give us all some encouragement as I get a little deep here, so to speak. Although actually what I'll be teaching you today isn't, in one sense, it's deep just in the sense that it refers to thinking and how to know what's true, but it's a pretty simple idea. The main thing about what I'll be showing you today is to realize that how we often just don't do it. So that'll be, and it's just a critical part of thinking accurately, regardless of how clever or not clever it might seem. Oh, is there another one, Mike? What do we have here? Kevin Kelly writes, Mike shows an email from an hour ago, or I don't know if it was an hour ago when Mike took the screenshot. Thanks to Alchemy and David's mist-dissolving clarity, there's great news in on my music business side. I've just been booked for 2 international gigs. Thanks, Mike and David, for all your positive energy. Wow, that's great. Just over 9K in business. Wow, I don't know how I get the credit for that, but as I said, I never object if someone wants to give me credit for something. Okay, so back to business here. Jamari, the undercover boss, is checking in. Excellent. Yes, yeah. When I was talking about how our brain likes to make things black and white for us when they're gray, correct. There's all sorts of ways this happens. It pretty much happens like everywhere all the time, even visually. If you could capture with a proper type of camera what the visual image kind of should be that from what's coming into your eye, it wouldn't really be a camera. It would be more. I don't know how they've done this. It's in one of the books I read about this topic, and I'm blanking on which one. Might be the subliminal book that I told you about. But the actual visual image that you should see based on I guess if you like kind of had a camera like behind your retina or something along those lines, is like kind of shockingly grainy and obviously has the blind spot and so forth. But um, and even it's in one sense two-dimensional, right? Um, or it could be, but instead you get this whole visual image that you experience. Um, Apprentice Alchemist, that's great. Um, so let's see here, Mike, right? And so our mind trying to impose black and white prematurely is a good way to put it. Right, is why we're so susceptible, right? What we once we look at things from a certain perspective or a category, or we people will say sometimes, like, and not always, but I believe this because I'm a conservative or liberal or Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever, right? They'll even it's easy for someone to assume, oh, you think that because you're a libertarian, David. No, I don't think anything because I'm a libertarian. I use that word just because to start with, it just kind of helps communicate, right? It's the after I have the conclusions that I have or the clarity that I have, including I don't have full clarity, but when I have the clarity I have about politics, then the best fit word is libertarian, although even that word refers to people all over the spectrum, right? You have Camille Paglia, you have Glenn Beck, neither of whom are anything or very close to anything that I uh, think of, or Bob Maher, right? I mean, is certainly far from, in many cases, from where I'm at, but you do your best. But yeah, you don't. But people will kind of talk as if they believe something because they're a particular ideology. Which, when you stop and think about that, it's both ridiculous and also a good example about how the mind will impose black and white, right, on something. Well, how could you believe something because uh, you're in a category, right? That's a fairly obvious reason or non-reason to that something is true. They might both be true. It might be true that someone is in a particular category and that they have a correct belief, but the belief isn't true because it is in a certain category. Okay, let's see here. So on this slide, which you've already seen, and I'm not covering all these things, I'm just covering the bottom one in this webinar, is a list of several of the ingredients that are kind of at the pretty close to the root of understanding what's true. The very bottom root is the conscious field distinction, which and remember, whatever the word consciousness, the word field, it can be used in different ways when in other people's speaking. I have to pick some word, and that word is gonna, can overlap with the same words that some other author or somebody might be saying. And I have, many times tried to refer and talk about exactly what I mean by it, which is just whatever it is that you're aware of, um, then consciously. Oh, sorry, it's even redundant to say consciously, right? It's just whatever you're aware of, and that includes how things seem in terms of your sensory experience, like what feels like the real world that where you're a body and you're walking around in it. That's all. That whole experience is your consciousness field. The moon, if it's far away but you're looking at it, then whatever you're experiencing about the moon is takes place in your consciousness field. And any thoughts you have, any feelings, anything that you would say, my mind is making me feel this way, is saying this, that, anything you're aware of. The inner workings of your mind that you're not directly aware of, those at any one time, those are not part of your consciousness field. And that's all part of the reasons why you're aware of what you're aware of, um, or um, there's plenty of stuff going on in the world, right, that I call the world of reasons, the physical world, which also includes your mind. Sorry, the world of reasons, the physical world, includes your brain. And then also in the world of reasons is your mind. A lot of it at any one time, like what's going on in Paris right now, doesn't really have a direct impact on my current consciousness field. But potentially it does. Just like a lot of the contents of my mind may not be currently activated or relevant to or being used for what I'm currently aware of, but at some point they might be, right? Okay. So the idea of our consciousness field is constantly where we want to ground ourselves when we're looking to think. Um, and then we build off of that. We build our definitions of words off of that. Um, and we even build the idea of grounding ourselves and just noticing quickly who we really are, which we sort of have to remind ourselves whenever we're grounding ourselves, right? We remind ourselves, wait, I'm just a being who's aware of what I'm aware of, my consciousness field. And then there's a whole world out there that I'm not directly aware of. I don't know its exact nature, but what it is it's composed of reasons why I'm aware of what I'm aware of, why other people are aware of what they're aware of, and so forth. And then I've also covered how we can understand that since we have a consciousness field and since it also changes, there has to be something out there. It's not in our consciousness field, so it's somewhere else, right? There has to be something that is capable of creating and changing consciousness fields. And then that's how we can construct our definition of what the word God refers to. And then we can discover other qualities that God must have. But just like with any word, we construct a reference point or definition starting from our consciousness field and the model we build off of that. And then once we've constructed a definition, nothing else can be true about that idea or word or person or God. By definition, anything else that's true about a particular word would have to be discovered through, simply put, like through logic, right? Or through accurate thinking, right? Logic just refers to not contradicting yourself, not changing the meanings of your words, essentially. So logic isn't like a force that does stuff. It just refers to not thinking just blatantly inaccurately, not fudging the definitions of our words, as I said, essentially. We could quibble about whether, when I say we can make more distinctions or figure out more qualities about God or ourselves or the outside world through logic. We could say it's not just logic, but whatever this whole method is, then that's that. But boiling it down to logic is not really a problem. Next time I will, probably on Monday, I'll talk more about equivocation, the law of non-contradiction, and so forth. So I'll talk a little bit more about words and logic. And it won't be like a lesson on logic that's kind of sanitized or irrelevant to our lives. Everything in alchemy alchemy is my method for making money, ironically, and for being happy and for succeeding and having like kind of easy and nice and sustainable relationships. So again, much like Greg shows you his method for monetizing via SEO, this is my method for monetizing and all other success. So it's not like I'm interested in teaching people how to think like in a vacuum. It's just that is my method. Is accurate thinking is how I do it. So let's see here. All right, what we want to do here is focus in on this one technique, but it's major. And I wrote, and I'm going to go to the next slide in a second that has this on top of it, but I wrote forward and back to the extremes, super simple scenarios first. All right. So I'll just go straight to some examples in a minute or two so I can show what I mean. It is probably going to be somewhat shocking to you. As you start to do this, what I'm showing you today on purpose, it'll be weird that people don't do it much. And it'll be weird how much you can see, like how much can become clear to you about all kinds of important things that you're figuring out, like, mainly which goals to pursue, which goal to have active right now, and how to go about best pursuing it, and so forth. Also dissolving blocks and issues that come up as you're doing that, or looked at from another angle. A lot of life is a big gray area, and then acknowledging that, and then saying, well, okay, well, what's black and white here that I can use to put the jigsaw puzzle together, right? To narrow things down, to have a foothold and to start building towards the answer or the goal or dissolving a problem that I'm running into. And and also when people ask me about scenarios and they say, well, I don't know if I'm really thinking in scenarios the way that you mean, David, or if it's vivid enough or whatever. What I'm showing you now will resolve a lot of that. And it'll pretty much be common sense, but then in practice, it's just not really used commonly. So let's see where we start. I could pretty much pick any topic in life, and that's an example. Suppose someone said, I wrote here examples, balance, right? So suppose someone says like, well, you have to live your life in balance. Well, what I do is I try to, oh, and the funny thing is there's kind of like advice out there that we shouldn't do this technique that I'm saying. Like, oh, why do you have to take things to extremes, right? If someone will use a premise or make a statement that'll kind of often be right, or in its simplistic form, it'll be right. But then if you take that statement to the extreme, then it'll show that it'll come to something crazy, and what that actually means is their statement doesn't always work, but they're treating it like it does, and then they'll say, well, you don't have to take it to extremes, right? But it was important that you did because then it shows that it doesn't it didn't work. So if we need to have balance in our lives, then and if people kind of take that as a premise, let's use this technique on that. And there's these are both related, but another thing we can do is go to like an extreme simple scenario as well. Now, well, let's say we did that with balance. Well, if we just say you have to have balance in your life, then what if you slept 18 hours, 12 hours a day and you were awake 12 hours a day? Right now, I just made a super simple scenario. But if we brought up balance, that type of thing might often just not occur to people. See, what people normally do is they just think in terms of associations and templates. When someone says or thinks about the idea that we should have balance, they'll use associative thinking and they'll combine it with confirmation bias, and they'll just sort of think of a corroborating mental picture or situation or that makes sense, right? Okay, yeah, like I picture eating in balance, and it's nice to have some recreation and do some work, right, and spend some time with my family, sleep a bit. And so if we just kind of pull from association and just sort of think like it's very imprecise doing that because there's so many possible like associations or thoughts or little mental images or examples that we could think of if we were thinking about balance. And so it's very arbitrary to just pick a few kind of quick mental images that come to us that corroborate. And we'll pretty much be able to agree with almost anything if we do that. Or if we want to be skeptical about something, we could pretty much always, just from like associative thinking, just kind of find a way to either misinterpret or twist or just prove something wrong. Of course, clearly correct statements, maybe we can't do that, but people can then even misunderstand them or something. All right, so going back to the super simple scenario that I said, well, what if we sleep 12 hours a day and are active for 12 hours a day? Well, that's balance, right? But that's absurd, right, to do that. And especially if that was our only balance, right? It didn't matter what we did while we were active, then as long as we were active 12 hours a day and sleep 12 hours a day, then we're in balance. And if people say balance is key or people might even say life is all about balance, right? Well, I just gave a super simple scenario that involves balance, 12 hours, and it's clearly absurd. So right away we can see that there's clarity. Now, someone who made that statement might come back and say, oh, well, why do you, like, that's obviously not what I meant. But then the question is, well, what did they mean? If balance is the key to life, And it's so easy. It only took me a second to come up with a very balanced situation that doesn't work. And I can go on all, like, it's not like that's the only one, right? Um, like a balanced diet. What even does that mean, right? I mean, the there's like the standard scheme that as I apparently I don't know much about this, but even just from my knowledge from decades ago, that basically the Dairy Council is the main one that pushed this through. You know, it's just the old food groups, thing, right? You want to balance the right balance between grains, dairy, and meats and vegetables and so forth. So that you're taught. I was taught, when I was in kindergarten, you know, 30 something years ago, 38 years ago, or whatever. That can look like balance, right? But perhaps that leaves out a whole ton of important um, knowledge about nutrition and eating, right? So everywhere we look with balance, we can, or at least all kinds of super simple scenarios that we look at. But even just the one, it shows that, well, what good is a statement that like that if it's not clarified? As soon as you can find one fairly simple and obvious counter scenario, right, that doesn't work. And this isn't about looking to be skeptical, not about twisting anything. It's just, it shows us that that statement isn't reliable. And there's something to be understood there if it's important. If we're going to be using that statement, then we need to start to um, make distinctions regarding it. And what we can do is we can test and see, well, is the statement total garbage? And it's pretty clearly not total garbage. If we use other simple scenarios, what if I was really imbalanced? What if I didn't nearly sleep enough? And what if I thought, oh man, if I just stay awake 24 hours a day, then I gain like 8 hours of productivity, you know? Or I don't even know with food. Presumably, if you eat just one type of food, then you won't get certain nutrients, right? Depending on maybe what the food is, but in almost every case. Um, that's a bit of an ultimate gray area for me. Maybe there's some person out there, or, there's so many different theories of nutrition. It's hard to know what's right or even guess these days. Um, but certainly we can imagine all kinds of like various ways where balance is going to be helpful, right? If we come up with a technique for or a credo for making money where we're very imbalanced with time we might spend with our personal life or our family. It's one thing if we're already single, perhaps, but even then, if we spend years focused um, and then we end up unhappy because we're alone, right? Then if that was intentional and we were okay with that, if we said, look, I'm just going to really focus in for a year or two, then that could work fine. And there's an example of imbalance. And what we're going to see, one of the things we're going to see is that temporary quote unquote imbalances might be perfectly fine because there's some times in life where it's just the time to really focus in on one thing, right? It's kind of funny because in some places we'll hear something about balance, like in various types of generally related to like success or life advice, right? Something, and then other times we'll hear stuff about focus. Those aren't necessarily in conflict, right? You can be focused here and then focus there, but have it all in balance. But they also there could be times when it's the right time perhaps to really focus in a way that would pretty clearly look like it would be imbalanced, but it might still be correct for a certain amount of time. But then in the bigger picture, there might be some balance. But really, balance itself, as we start to look at it, is more like an observed. It's almost like it itself is not what is giving us the benefit, right? Really, what we want to do is use our resources in the most effective, efficient, the way that leads to the most net good, right? Suppose that we said instead that understanding is key, especially understanding what's important about what's good, right, or what's true, understanding what's true about what's important. important meaning like what has the most impact, what's the best use of resources regarding what leads to good. If we take that to the extremes, as far as I can tell, then there's never a time when having better understanding is going to do anything but help you. Um, we could maybe think of a time when or a situation where we like stop we aren't doing something that could get us ahead because we're supposedly seeking understanding. But even then, but even if we think about that, so let's suppose we just imagine, going out and getting clients, or someone saying, no, I'm not going to go out and get clients. I'm going to try to understand instead. And then we might say, well, you see there, it's better for them not to be thinking about it. They could just be going after clients. Even then, what are they lacking? Actual understanding one way or the other about something. Right. So if they got actual understanding related to anything in that along that topic of getting clients, whether they should get clients, what their goals should be regarding getting clients and understanding, um, if they knew more about what was true, about what was important in order to get them, to what was going to be good for them, then that would help them. Right. That's not the problem. The problem here is we imagine that we almost contradict ourselves perhaps, or potentially do in this scenario. If we say, well, the person already understands that they should go and get clients, and instead of acting on that understanding, they just sit around doing like quote unquote thinking and doing it ineffectively. Like they're basically we're gonna call that seeking understanding, but they're not gonna get understanding. They're just gonna kind of stare at the wall or just sit in a chair, drink some coffee, write in their notebook, but make no progress with understanding. You see what I mean? Like where as we look closer at that supposed or potential counterexample of, well, sometimes thinking is counterproductive. Sometimes it doesn't help. Well, I didn't say like thinking. I said understanding. And um, as soon as we make sure that's keep that consistent and don't equivocate, don't twist the idea of actually having understanding into ineffectively thinking, not taking action, right? Um, Understanding leads to action, right? Then we could find that counterexample, that potential counterexample to, well, maybe seeking understanding or having understanding is is can be counterproductive. Well, it's not, right? If and again, because if the person was already understood that they should be that it was going to make most sense for them to focus on getting clients for a particular part of their day, then they would go do it. Right? They wouldn't. There's nothing they would need to seek understanding about, except for within that. Now that they're seeking understanding, would be within getting clients. The context would be that they're taking action, and then they're taking action. Remember, it's pretty much a good go-to strategy. Once you've identified, all right, I want to get clients, then your actions can be, your goals regarding that can be reframed around seeking understanding. Even if you're going out and networking, even if you're going to a meeting, or if you're preparing a presentation, whatever it might be, you can be working on preparing the presentation, but ultimately you know that by doing that, you're gaining an understanding, whatever else happens. And that I found that to just be constantly effective. So I don't worry about balance. I don't think in terms of balance, and I just use the idea of balance to illustrate what I mean about thinking in extremes and using simple scenarios. Balance is just sort of something you observe in a person who is using their resources wisely, and it also happens to be fairly balanced. Because sometimes using your resources wisely might not look like balance. Sometimes someone is using their resources unwisely, and it could be the case that a wiser use of their resources would look more balanced also, right? Like if someone is focusing on their new internet marketing business that they're building and neglecting their health or family, or even neglecting some reflection time, and they're getting themselves too worked up and frustrated and so forth, then that person would look imbalanced, and they also would be using the resources in to some degree not wisely, right? Some of the resources might be being used correctly, right? I'm not saying they shouldn't be working on their internet marketing business, but there's a sort of overuse, right, of their resources perhaps on moving forward with their internet marketing business. Not enough on reflecting, getting their foundation right. Not enough perhaps on their family if they already have one, or anything like that. Maybe going to the gym to help relieve stress and so forth, whatever it might be. And then it might turn out that the more correct use of their resources, then when we observe them doing that, it would also look more balanced. But what makes the resource use right isn't balance, right? It it's just whatever would actually end up making them happy. It's just based more on reality. I don't know how to say it with words best, but I think it's already kind of clear, right? Like it isn't the balance that's making them better off. Like if they go to the gym and that helps them have more energy and less stress, and it also gives them a chance to reflect maybe and just think about what they're doing, and also helps build their confidence, and also just gives them more angles on life, even maybe helps them meet people, right? It could have all kinds of benefits. It isn't, the balance is not what's giving them the benefit. You see, balance is just something we kind of notice or kind of like a on the surface, right? Um, it's all the actual real benefits that are benefiting this person in this scenario. You see, and all of what I'm doing here also is examples of using scenarios, right? I've just been using scenarios kind of nonstop for the past several minutes. Okay, how about fairness, right? I've covered this, but just to apply it to this super simple scenario. If you're wondering what to do about a super simple scenario, if it involves people, then often you can imagine 10 people on like an island, right? That's a great starting point. There's 10 people on an island. One of them invents a great service for the other nine, and the other nine go out and and get the coconuts and like that they use for money or kind of barter, and the guy gets a lot of coconuts because of this great service that this guy or woman figures out and does. Is that unfair? Right? They're going to have an unfair amount of coconuts, but what would be better? Would it be better to just take the person's coconuts back after they earn them? Would it be better to, if the person hadn't invented that service that everybody wants? Right? No. Right? So fairness becomes a little bit like balance, where fairness in and of itself isn't what's doing any good. It's just something that in some cases in life, um, if they're all walking around together and they discover a bunch of coconuts that fell from a tree, and they're thinking how to divide them, then in that case, dividing them equally is probably the right solution, right? When I was starting OMG with Mike and Greg, and we were all like, we just started as equal partners, right? That was fair. That kept us from trying to figure out, is Mike 10% more valuable than David? Is David 10% more valuable than Mike? It's just that's pretty counterproductive, right? Instead, we're all people with experience, and we've proven ourselves, and we had respect for each other, and so we just made it even and fair. There's plenty of cases like that, just like with balance, where the fairer solution, the fairer whatever, solution or result is better than one that's less fair. But it's not the fairness that's making it better. Fairness is just kind of a model or an idea that we project onto it. And it's not a false word, right? Like balance and fairness can be real terms that have a real meaning, but they're in neither case are they the thing that's making it better, right? In the case of Mike, Greg, and myself, when we started OMG and we split things equally, what was nice about the fairness was that like it removed any kind of sense of competition or credit or comparing one person to another. would it be helpful for us to like have a big discussion about why, like, where I'm trying to make the case that I'm better and why Greg is worse, and Greg's making the case. I mean, this is totally far-fetched. It's beyond ridiculous, of course. And of course, I don't think that I'm better in the least, or that he's like, oh, the whole question is just terrible, right? Like, if we just think, do we want to start to ask the question about who's better, who's more valuable, um, especially when we're like within the margin of error, right? Where it's obviously a gray area, right? Whether Greg, Mike, or myself is more valuable for the type of business that we're about to start. Um, clearly gray. Clearly, there's no like big obvious answer that can't be escaped. And given that, then trying to asking the question and working on it is it's not going to be helpful. And then on top of that, what do I want to do? Do I want to have Greg earn more than me, and then Greg feels like he has to do a lot more? Or do I want to make more than Greg or Mike, and then feel like more is on my shoulders, and they're demotivated? No, right? Like, um, so all of those are real reasons why we kept it even in that case. It wasn't because of fairness, right? And again, what I'm showing you here is that to see if someone says, well, fairness is very important, right? Or of course, like the buzzwords like what income equality, so economic justice, right? Justice and fairness are often, they can mean different things. They can also mean, they can be kind of used as synonyms. And so what we do is we just find simple scenarios, like I did with the 10 people on the island. We can also take it to the extreme. How do we ensure income equality? Uh, well, if we killed everybody, then everyone would make an equal income. Or if we just confiscated everyone's money and burned it, right? In real life, it just seems to end up flowing to, right, the very demagogues who are talking about fairness end up being the ones that get super rich. So that's a clue right there. That something's off. Um, but then if we take it to the extremes, then the only way to have everything fair is basically just to kind of metaphorically, or actually kill everyone or take all their stuff, right? And give it to no one. As soon as we give it to anybody to distribute or to be in charge of, now that's not fair, right? So we'd have to basically burn all goods, all food, right? The minute no one could eat, everyone would then die, right? As soon as someone was in charge of distributing it, that wouldn't be fair. So that's an absurdity. We take it to the extreme. We see, and what we did was we made it big. Taking things to the extreme is exactly right. And now I'm not saying to do this out loud with other people until and unless you use your judgment, right? It is often not, because it goes against anything where I'm showing you a correct way to think that goes against default thinking is not necessarily a smart social thing to say out loud. It may be, and it will definitely help you be more social by thinking accurately. But part of that, you take into account other people's minds and how they're going to feel, and you be smart about that. So I'm not saying that you run around to other people taking their ideas to the extremes in order to show how wrong they are. You can understand how someone's wrong, and then understand what's accurate, and that understanding can help you. Make sure to never ever use accurate thinking techniques in order to feel superior. That's why we're also dealing with the self-image stuff. If you have a goal to feel superior, to feel more good, or even to equally good as other people, then you're still going to try to get ahead of the game, right? As soon as I want to feel like I'm as good as other people, then I need to sort of accumulate points for a rainy day, right? And so I like want to accumulate, oh, well, I'm better this way, right? Anything, any use of alchemy to feel like you're more moral, more better, more smart than other people is going to backfire on you. Just gain understanding. Don't gain understanding to be better than someone else. As a side note, forget about goals in general to be the best. Right? I believe I've mentioned this in passing before as well. Why would you want to be the best? What the hell does that have to do with anything? Oh, there's another great example of exactly what we're talking about. Okay, let's take this. Suppose you're on an island and you're with 9 other people who are horrific at gathering food or any kind of agriculture, any kind of activity that results in food. They're terrible at it, and there's 10 of you, and the other 9 are terrible. Do you want to be the best? Well, technically you better be the best, but do you want to be good enough to be able to feed 10 people and more if you multiply, right? Do you see? And to help other people, right? Get better at it, perhaps. Um, so do you see? Being the best is an arbitrarily ridiculous measuring stick that as far as I can tell, should never be used unless there's a restricted activity. Now, if we take that to the extreme, can we think of anything? Well, if there's a restricted activity where all you have to do is be the best and then you get a particular reward, and if that activity itself is basically fine, like you're playing a game, no one else is getting hurt, whatever, then fine. Then, like, again, so if it's basically stipulated into the situation that you're in, and if the situation itself is just fine, and again, it's generally going to be a game or some sort of game-like activity, then being the best might be all you need. If you are trying to rank on Google, then of course all you need to do is outrank the other people trying to rank for that keyword. I get that, right? So, and someone has to come up first, someone has to come up second. That's fine. So there are times when so I just did my same technique, right? Looking at it from different angles, looking for extreme examples and so forth. I look for counter examples and I look for corroborating examples. I never only do one of those two, right? It's very common. By default, the brain tends to, or the mind just tries to either corroborate something if it being true kind of furthers our goals or our identity and so forth, or our model fits in our model of the world, or people try to disconfirm something, or they're skeptical or this or that. When you ask somebody if they have an open mind, they always think about the times when they were skeptical of something, right? But sure, people have an open mind. In other words, actually, people are just fine being skeptical of certain things, and then they're totally will just want to confirm other things. All you have to do to combat that is kind of a very simple technique. Just always, whenever you're thinking along the lines of where you're looking for confirming or something against, just do the opposite too. You'd be surprised how just a simple effort with looking, this isn't the same as looking at pros and cons, although that's an example of doing this perhaps. But looking for pros and cons in and of itself is ignoring this whole thing I'm teaching you here, I'm showing you here. Because if you don't go to the extremes, if you don't make things simple and big and visible, then just looking for pros and cons, it'll be a goal-driven activity, and your mind can easily just find more pros than cons or more cons than pros, and end up just corroborating whatever it wants to corroborate, or disconfirming, right, disproving whatever it wants to disprove. So really, I'm not really thinking in terms of pros and cons. I'm really thinking about looking to go, again, like make things big and obvious, not even really for and against, just is there a big obvious scenario, like with balance. I came up with a big obvious scenario that showed balance appearing to work, and I came up with a big obvious scenario that showed it not working, right? And same with fairness, right? When I said you're with a group and you come across just a bunch of coconuts that fell from the tree right on your island, then splitting it evenly between that group or between everyone, whatever makes more sense in that situation. That's reasonable, right? So I came up with a big, either big or super simple scenario that corroborated, and I came up with ones where it's clearly ridiculous, right? Just basically killing everyone, burning all the goods, taking everything from everybody, preventing someone from providing a service that everyone wants because they're getting too many coconuts from doing it, that sort of thing. So I didn't come up with a list of pros and cons, did I? Right? I came up with super simple scenarios to find. And what does that mean? That means this is basically a cluster, or like a cluster of berries, right? Where some are good, some are bad. We need to make a distinction. When I come up with a simple scenario where fairness makes sense, and a simple scenario, or simple or big or extreme scenario, something simple if it's big and extreme, right? Too, and I'll get to more of this. But if I can come up with something where it's clearly correct, and if I come up with something where it's clearly wrong, then what does that mean? That means there's distinctions to be made regarding this topic. And how do you see distinctions better is you is this the same thing, right? You make big, simple, possibly extreme scenarios, and then you start to and okay, so if we're looking at this fairness thing and we're trying to distinguish, okay, so when do you use fairness and when do you not? Um, Sorry, one quick second. Just want to check. Okay, wasn't sure if my refrigerator door was open. Random thing. Let me try to just do this too with you in real time. What I mean by the distinction. So there's clear times when we don't want fairness, right? I kind of already know the answer, right? When we're infringing on someone's property rights. Uh, what'll either often or sometimes end up happening is we realize there's just a different concept we want to apply. When I talked about balance, and part of this is I kind of know the answer, so and doing it in real time might take hours, you know, if I didn't. But with balance, what we found by looking at these kind of big, obvious scenarios is that really we want to make good resource management decisions, and to do that we want to understand more, right? And understanding is based on accumulating things that we can know or distinctions, right? And when I talk about things we can know, when you have a big, obvious scenario, remember it was either last time or the time before, when I showed you about mismatching and how you can know big, obvious differences, at least, right? And so when you make a scenario and there's big, obvious things in it, then that's something you know. When I said, well, we know we don't want to just prevent the person from performing the service we all want that we're paying them a bunch of coconuts for, because what good is that? Right. First of all, it obviously violates their property rights. Second of all, who's better off? It just means the service is not getting provided. Bottom line, right? So we know that's something we can know, that we don't just want to prevent them from doing that. So balance, as we looked at it with big, obvious, simple, extreme, possibly extreme scenarios, then we could see again resource management understanding. With fairness, what more matters is property rights. When we came across these coconuts lying there, well, does anyone own them to start with? No. We all kind of have an equal claim to them, right? So we would divide it equally, right? Pretty simple. So that'll come down to property rights. Let's go on with a new example I wrote. How about money? It's very easy to get caught in where implicitly we're behaving as if more money always makes more sense. And what's interesting is that people will do this to us, and it'll seem so normal and obvious that we won't even notice. People will do this to me, where they'll assume that it's just kind of natural that I'll do more work for more money. But that isn't necessarily the case, right? For you, there's plenty of things you won't obviously do for more money. And then you can reach a point where you don't really necessarily need to make decisions based on money at all, perhaps. And you can work that into your thinking now. And it's pretty easy to see when you go to the extreme. This is a super easy example, but people very commonly act as if more money is obviously better. That like people just obviously want more business, want more money. Sometimes we'll see a business that say, gosh, I can't believe they don't do such and such a thing, because they would make more money if they did. You see? So if we say that, it carries the implication that automatically more money is better. If we said they would make more money if they did this such and such an activity, if they didn't do this thing wrong, but perhaps there's a resource management reason why they don't want to do that, or maybe they're satisfied with the money they have. If we made a statement like that, that would be, as far as I can tell, correct right now as I'm talking. But if we just leave it with the assumption that we should always have more, that they should do it, and that with the idea that it would make them more money, and then that implies that they always should do things that make more money. right? If we make a statement and don't give it like parameters or clarify it, then implicit within that statement is that it's always true. And if you were to point that out to someone or take their statement to the extreme, they would say, well, I didn't mean it to the extreme, or I didn't mean it always. Well, they had to have, because that is the meaning of a statement. There's no meaning of they should do X. It doesn't mean the same as they maybe should do X, right? Like the word maybe, it's not that hard to say the word maybe. So it wasn't like they just lacked the breath to say it, right? They just mean two different things. So this restaurant should do X is just plain not equal, not identical. It's a full-on equivocation to say, which means changing the meanings of someone's words, to say, oh, well, I didn't mean it like always or all the time. I didn't mean it to the extreme. Of course you meant it to the extreme. That's the meaning of the words. It's the literal meaning, but it's not taking someone too literally. And none of this is about like jumping down someone's throat. I'm just helping. This is about thinking accurately for yourself and noticing these things. Because what will happen is these ideas will slip in there beneath your conscious notice. And so I'm bringing them to your attention to help you as you try to dissolve down to one active goal at a time, to try to figure out how to use your resources best and so forth. And to just declutter yourself. A lot of these ideas are sitting around swimming in our mind, and they kind of come up associatively. They'll just kind of pop, oh, wait, I should have balance. Oh, things should be fair. Well, no, you don't need these ideas at all. These ideas are just incorrect. And then when I say they're incorrect, does that contradict that I said, well, sometimes balance is okay or sometimes fairness is okay? No, it's incorrect because the idea that, well, things should be fair, that's incorrect, because things should be fair is not identical. It's exactly, it's contradictory to say that it equates to things should sometimes be fair. So fairness is good contradicts fairness is sometimes good, in the sense that they're not equal. If I said fairness is good is equivalent to sometimes fairness is good, that's wrong. That's false. Okay, so and in practical real life, when you're thinking about things, the idea that balance is always good will often pop into people's minds. Not as like this overwhelming, huge only thought, but it just adds to the confusion and the clutter. Once we understand it's sometimes good, then we just can discard it. Forget about balance. Looking there doesn't matter. I wrote a post in one of the Facebook groups a few days ago talking about how looking at the speed at which you're progressing to your goal, that's not helpful, right? And basically fully decluttering by ignoring speed. If you want to accomplish a goal faster, like simply put, if you want to build your income with the OMG general income, monetization methods, then monetizing free traffic, getting work with clients, or making your own website or Amazon business or whatever. If someone's doing it and feels like, oh, I should be ahead of where I am right now, well, that metric of how fast you're going is just fully cluttering your mind, and your mind just getting that associatively. If you were just looking at big, obvious scenarios to help you get a sense of not where you should be, but just what you should be doing, right? How you should be allocating your resources. Remember that, and thinking about resource management or allocation, that will lead you right. Let's take that one to the extreme. What if you constantly get your allocation of resources right? What if you have a better understanding rather than a worse understanding of how to allocate your resources, your focus, your subconscious processing, not having drag, right? Drag is like an allocation of resources in a different direction that your mind might have going after another goal. Will you ever, how did I know that you want to go down to one active goal at a time? Well, your resources have to be distributed somehow, right? Whatever they are, conscious focus, as I say, money, time of your body moving around, and so forth. If you have if some resources are being allocated in a different direction, especially if they're active, so they're like dragging, right? Or Um, uh, it's just going to work against you. Right? It's pretty big and obvious right off the bat. I know. It opens up a whole new question of how of like where to allocate this resource or that resource, depending on, well, I'm trying to make money, but I'm also trying to feed my self-image and feel confident and feel like I'm a good person and feel like I'm already right about my my ideas about the world. My model of the world is already right, and I'm already intelligent. Constantly, those are going to pull in opposite directions, right? Um, right, with the obvious of going out and meeting people or trying to rank a website or trying to go after any goal, if not achieving that goal, especially in a certain time frame, is going to uh, potentially ding your self-image, then that's something you have to take into account. And that opens up a whole new separate resource management issue. Plus, people will just spend a lot of money on things that are going to reinforce their self-image, and they just won't have that money later for other things. Let's see. So, talking about a couple of related things here. If we go back to the idea of well, more money is good, right? Well, again, that's pretty obviously wrong, right? Well, how about if I have $1 trillion? Is another $100,000 worth doing whatever for? No. As soon as now that's extreme, but good. So I know that some distinction has to be made. Oh, and I was comparing it with resource management. If you allocate your resources well, will that always help you? Yeah, right, as far as I can tell. Maybe you can come up with something. And then I'd say, well, look for a counterexample. So let's try to look for something. Um, and then you say, well, how do you start trying to look for something? You can just, what you can do if you're not sure where to start, come up with a scenario. You can have a few like go-to scenarios that don't necessarily, for starters, have anything to do. This is what I'm saying now is going to be a great hint for you. This is probably something that gets in your way or will help get you unstuck at times, and you might get stuck trying to think like this in this accurate scenario-based way. So if I'm trying to think of a possible counterexample for better resource management being better, or even focusing there rather than focusing on balance or fairness, is there a time when wiser, better resource management is maybe better is a loaded term, but more efficient resource management, whatever, is going to be a problem. And if nothing springs to mind, then I can impose a scenario on it. So suppose I'm working on a website, right? And I'm let's say I'm starting out where I'd ideally like it to have something on it where people can take an action that'll make me money, and or I'm even considering this. I'm considering setting up a website where people can come to it, take an action, people can make money. So I need a product on the website. I need the website to look good for conversion, right? Every business endeavor, you need a product, you need conversion, sales, right? And you need people to come, traffic, people to come to the website. So you can start out thinking about that and then think, all right, well, first of all, if I just narrow the world down to just that, I stipulate that's all that's going on, I definitely want to do it. If I allocate, is there any situation where if I allocate my resources best, or if I think about how to allocate my resources best, will that help me? Well, there's one thing we can spot that, well, if I just sit around thinking about how to allocate my resources best and that's all I do, then certainly that's not going to be enough, right? Then I won't be doing any work on my website. On the other hand, it doesn't, like, actually allocating your resources well is different than just thinking ineffectively about it forever. So those aren't equivalent. So I can make that distinction and discard. Yeah, I get that I shouldn't just pick my navel and ineffectively think about allocating my resources. However, if we compare that with balance, balance doesn't just mean ineffectively thinking about balance. It means targeting balance. It means setting kind of a goal for balance, so to speak. Or, and a goal doesn't have to be like an active goal all the time, but even when I'm planning, if I'm trying to plan to maximize balance, that won't, we figured out that isn't going to be very helpful. However, what if when I'm planning, I'm looking to maximize my resource efficiency or effectiveness? Now that's interesting because efficiency could mean that I'm always trying to use just the minimum amount of resources as possible. That could also backfire a little bit if I'm trying to figure out what's the least amount of time I could spend, let's say, working on my website in order to make it effective. Well, that might not be a great pursuit. Is trying to figure out the least amount. But if I just generally want to effectively use my time, my mental processing, my money, and so forth, generally getting a sense of like looking to have it be effective in terms of reaching my goal, then getting it right is what I want, right? And even with the efficiency, if I did happen to get that right, then it would be fine. If I correctly could have arrived, just to take that to the extreme for a moment, if I correctly arrive at the exact amount that I need and no more of time to actually succeed with my website, then that actually would help me. So interestingly enough, I was looking to find like kind of a place that can go wrong, but even then, if I hit it exactly, then that would work. Now that leads me to another thought, and I'm kind of doing this in real time with you. Now, though, I have a choice. What's more important, to exactly hit the minimum amount of time or to make sure I succeed with the website endeavor? Now this brings us to another thought. Well, in one sense, we can see neither, because neither do I want to like devote all my life resource. I'm going to take it to the extreme again. Would I want to say, well, how about if I just determined to devote all my life resources, my money, my time, my focus, my subconscious focus, whatever, my favors I might have with other people, right, my relationships, sacrifice it all, kind of am willing to spend it all in order to make this website work. Well, that doesn't really work either. But so then what I want to do is get a sense of, do I think that with a sort of reasonable amount of resources, where I'm willing to maybe overshoot it by even double, right? Like I can ask myself, whatever the minimum amount of time and resources it might take to succeed, what if I ended up spending double that amount of time, right? If I just sort of look around in the world and what it takes someone to succeed, if minimum is like 3 months, and then what about 6 months? Actually, what if it took me a year and a fair amount of my resources, but what if I kept my job? What if I kept my relationship with my family just fine? And it took me a year, and I didn't like go into a debt like a kind of inescapable or reasonably inescapable type of debt, like too much, debt that was really causing me problems for other reasons. And it took me a year to succeed. Would that be okay? Okay, and the answer might well be yes. And not only then that would even and what if I put aside my self-image for that year? At the end of that year, would my anything to do with my self-image at least be the same or better? Yeah, right? Even without getting too deep about one's self-image. What if I just put that whole goal aside for a year about worrying about whether I'm good enough, smart enough, that sort of thing, right? Whether people like me, put it aside for a year, work on making it. And what if I failed at the end of the year? Well, what would failure look like? Let me look at about how much time I devote, about how much money I devote. Well, actually, I'd probably have all kinds of understanding about websites, website business, products, conversion, sales, traffic. At the end of that year, I'd probably be in a great position, given that plenty of people do succeed to some decent level online. At the end of that year, I'd have such a head start how about if I then was willing to give it another year? You know, um, at some point, perhaps there might be some point in which I might give up. But then, and then we could look at the opposite. Well, what if I just didn't do any of it? Well, then I don't really have any financial hope in that case. I'm stuck with my job, and there's really because the only real way to build and that might you can that might be fully okay. Maybe I could a person could be fully happy that way. Um, but um, but for a lot of us, that's not the case, right? So we could say, well, what's the alternative to having a website type of business succeed online? Uh, well, I'm going to need to have some sort of monetization outside of my job in order to have a sort of hope and excitement regarding money, right? In order to have things be better for myself and my family, perhaps retire early if that motivates me, um, perhaps to be helping people in a more direct way, right? Again, I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but I'm walking through the thought process, right, with clear, simple scenarios and taking things to the extreme when helpful, when I have a question, when I'm all right, so the alternative, really, there is no um, better alternative, right? All the same logic about trying things for a year would apply to a brick and mortar business, right? Or really any business, network marketing, multi-level marketing business, anything. So really, I'm either going to try to build something for myself in addition to my job, or I don't have a job, but you understand, I'm just thinking in this scenario as an imaginary person. Or I'm not, right? If I'm not, then my life needs to be built around just the money that comes in from my job and the restrictions that come from my job and so forth. That might be fine, but if it's not, then then the only alternative anyway is some sort like a website business is completely reasonable, right? And then if I'm going to do that, how about a year? And then after a year, um, then I'm going to I'll very possibly succeed. But if not, I'll have such a background and stuff built up that how about give it another year? Even now, even right in my head right now, I'm just giving it that time. Um, Really, if I keep my resources that I'm using at a manageable level, maybe what I do is I really focus to try to get that breakthrough momentum for several months or even a year, and I see if I can clear the way with my family to do that. And then I might clear the way and say, look, I'm really going to focus for a year. I'm going to get what I get from that. After that year, I'm going to dial it back. I'm going to look to potentially dial it back. And if I've succeeded, great. And if I haven't succeeded, then I'm going to stick with it, but in a more balanced way, where I'm not so focused, where I'm sacrificing, where I'm asking you guys and my family to have significantly less of me, right? And by the way, my dad did something like this when I was in first through fourth grade. Now I am talking about myself. My dad, he worked on Wall Street. He wasn't like rich or anything, but he made a moderate salary. But the small company that he worked for, that he figured the guy was going to sell. He was kind of winding down. He was getting old, and he was going to sell. And my dad didn't know what would happen after that to him and his job. And so he actually went to law school and he was, I guess, in his 40s, and then to be able to have an alternative career. And so we knew for 4 years he was going to need to do that in the evening, and I wouldn't see him as much, right? He still made some time for me, but it was that's what it was. What it was. With neither did he make a whole lot of money, but he supported the family just great, and I respect him greatly. Um, so um, so something similar with an online business, right? If it suited somebody, and it could be going to school for something else, right? But then you're just switching jobs, which could be fine for some people. But if we in this day and age, something on the internet could be great. So you just think about it that way, and then think I could dial it back. So you're thinking about resource management. You're taking things to the extreme. What if I focus to some degree? What if I focus in for a year and I have no results to show for it? Will that be okay? Well, actually, I'll have plenty of results. They'll just be in terms of experience, understanding various resources. But if there's no money, then that's that. And then what do I do from there? Okay, wait. Then sure, I'll give it another year or two or three. What else? What's the alternative, right? Um, and so again, you build on what you know, you focus in, and keep things simple when possible. And be fully willing to take things to the extreme. like I said, about no results after a year in terms of actual money coming in. But then we realized that even when we took things fully to the extreme, we couldn't have no results in terms of experience, understanding, and so forth, right? We'd clearly be far, far past where we are now. And so that next year we'd have an even better ability to succeed. Okay. That is pretty nice. Let's go and just and talk to each other for a while, and then I might continue with some slides, but I may well not. I'm glad I got a chance to describe that. We can all use our judgment on using that more. Probably now that I've introduced that to you pretty well, probably what I'll do is as I move forward, this will just come up nonstop. You can also see it nonstop in the in my previous alchemies. This is one of my major go-to methods that I use. And it's kind of simple and obvious in one sense, but it's counterintuitive in another sense. And it's also counter to what people actually do a lot of the time. Um, but mostly I'll be able to just point it out from now on, I'm guessing. Had all those examples lined up, but we, we did well with the ones that we had. Okay, let's talk a bit. Right, Chris wrote an hour ago. Chris wrote, I've noticed that the mind is not like ambiguity or uncertainty. Correct. Especially, here's the thing, your mind can deal with uncertainty and ambiguity, but not regarding things that it needs to like stand on, so to speak, in order to move forward. And so our whole issue, right, fundamentally in life, or one big angle on it, is that starting out when we're an infant, right, we need to move forward in some way, but we don't know what's going on. And we can't figure out the real foundations. And so our mind creates like kind of a false but workable foundation, right? It's like approximate and just has to work well enough. And then people never break out of that. And that's, of course, one big angle in what alchemy is about, is if we get we discover the correct foundation, we no longer need there's just major problems, massive problems, and we're totally boxed in if we're not willing to take a new look at our foundation and rebuild it properly, including, of course, our not just our self-image in terms of improving it, but our self-image and looking at fundamentally what do I want to base it on, right? And we want to base it on what we could discover that's true about ourselves and building from there rather than trying to, right, our self-image is one of the basic foundational things that we use to move forward in terms of feeling confident, like we're good enough and so forth. And then to do that, that's all based on coming up with standards for one of the craziest things that you can notice is how ourselves and other people are constantly just coming up with our own standards of why we're better than other people. Why, you know, like it could be fashion, it could be how much money we make, or how much time we spend with our family, or how our family is, or how good looking our significant other is, or that we don't care how good looking people are, right? There's these bazillions of standards out there, and people are constantly trying to fight for their standard being the one, especially at least in their own head. So then people feel like they're good because they're measuring up to their own standard. And if we can just get out of all of that and quit with it, with this thinking based on comparing to standards and coming up with our own, worrying about whether we meet others, of course we can, then it'll declutter our thinking so we can get a sense of other people's standards, so we can deal on their level while we're interacting with someone, right? Pacing and leading. Obviously, it makes sense to be paying attention to how other people are viewing the world and including their standards and norms when interacting with them effectively. Um, but when we're not so cluttered with our own, then we could just be looking out for others, because we're not looking by not looking at the world that way. We can actually see how other people are looking at the world that way far clearer. Our own standards and norms are going to greatly blind us. They're going to obfuscate or kind of be this opaque thing in front of our face when we're trying to relate to other people. And practically speaking, that's a massive problem, and you're going to have a tremendous advantage. And not to speak in superlatives all the time, but there's no, like, the superlatives totally apply in this case when you're not thinking that way in terms of standards and norms. And everything we're doing will help you with that. When you're trying to deal with your own, with dissolving the wrong way to going about your self-image, then the technique I showed you today is a major part of that, right? Major part of thinking accurately, major ingredient is what we talked about today. And I'm guessing that you've had some further aha moments and clarity about scenarios themselves by me talking about what I talked about today. So Chris was writing that the mind does not like ambiguity or uncertainty, so it jumps to a conclusion even if wrong to stabilize itself, seemingly. Right. Yeah. When right, your mind just doesn't like to stack blurriness. But then what the problem with doing this fairly obvious problem. Well, you'd think it would be obvious, except for people just all do this. Their minds do it, and people don't stop it or get out of it for the most part. But reality just becomes more and more of a problem, right? The more we're trying to project a certainty about reality, that it's a certain way, or that our goal that we promise people, oh, I'm going to do this for you, or I'm going to achieve this, or we promise ourselves, I'm going to achieve this goal in this time frame. The problem is, as we get close to that deadline, then reality intrudes more and more, right? And so that tension between reality and our projection of black and white onto the gray, right? Our desire for reality to be a certain way, whatever. Our feeling that we want to be certain reality is going to be one way, but the more it becomes clear that it's the more reality intrudes on it, and there's a difference. The more agitated, we'll feel and tense and all that. And then to overcome that, we'll feel like pushing harder, right? And then it's like a cycle, a vicious cycle that people get into. I'm trying to help you get out of course. Chris wrote, I like to stipulate the concept as it allows the mind to be persuaded to go along and heal, as it removes some uncertainty but allows revision. Absolutely, exactly. Whenever you catch your mind, or like yourself and your mind, and just where, look, I've got to believe this to move forward. Say, oh, actually, I don't have to believe it. I could just stipulate it. I could say, look, and here's something you can do. You could say, is the opposite clearly it could be true or false, but just make so if you're um, if it really helps me to feel like when I go into doing an alchemy webinar, if it helps me to feel like to move forward with it, that it's not going to be a total disaster, and that I'm not going to ruin everyone's day and so forth, right? Then I can just check and say, do I absolutely know that it will be a disaster and it'll ruin everyone's day? Clearly, no, I don't know that. And so now I can just chill out, right? As long as I know that the thing I'm kind of stipulating the opposite of, like, so if I stipulate that, not that it'll be great or not, but that I've reasonably prepared, um, and that it can be a great webinar, uh, that whatever it is that people do to feel confident, so relating to confidence, so you can move forward. If I stipulate whatever I want regarding confidence, then I can just check to make sure that the opposite is not clearly true, right? We don't want to stipulate something where it's definitely false, but if I can't know one way or the other, then might as well stipulate, right? And then stipulating is great because then we don't have the same problem. And I'll continue with stipulating. There'll be all kinds of places where I'll show you more and more about it working in action and clarifying about it. And thank you, Chris. That was another example of it. Gary wrote, I think political views are like a circle with meeting in the middle is facing forward, and the space of libertarian is where the extreme right meets the extreme left on the backside. Correct. That's one correct way to look at it, or a reasonably correct way to look at it. For me, I just use the word to start with just to calm anyone down that might be worried that I'm either liberal or conservative, and I hate the opposite. There's less hatred for libertarian, but fundamentally, I like to base things on one principle, on one idea, and build from there. Because if you're having, you can't really double define things, right? So it's basically my political views have to do with just individual property rights and nothing else, and then just building from there and what you have to build. And the opposite of individual property rights is clearly absurd, so that's how I know it's correct. The opposite of individual property rights is that people don't own any property. All right, I'm not saying people own all property. I'm not saying you as an individual own all property. I'm just saying you own some, or that you can morally own some. And the opposite of that is you morally own none of it, which means that you don't own your body. Anyone could rape you. You don't own any of your money. It's totally fine to take your house, your money. You don't own your reputation. Slandering you is perfectly fine. That kind of thing. That's obviously ridiculous. In practice, what people end up believing, but it's an inherently nonsensical concept. Again, when you magnify it and make it simple and extreme and obvious, is well, as long as there's a way to as long as I feel reasonably sure that I could take someone's property, then it's okay. Like basically, people own their own property unless we can come up with some justification to take it, and then it's okay to take it. That's the actual belief of 99+% of the population, it seems. And maybe it isn't. Maybe there's a lot. Maybe 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50 people. The weird thing with political views is depending on how you ask the question, you can get all kinds. People can come up anyway, right? Most everyone's libertarian if you ask the right questions, right? But then people end up. Most everyone, on the other hand, will affirm some form of, oh no, we could take people's property as long as we can justify it, uh, and but it's justifying it in terms of like always some kind of greater good thing, or we feel pretty sure, or it's unfair, or which it boils down to greater good. Um, but the only way to justify a property rights violation, as far as I can figure out and understand, is against the specific individual that did a property rights violation in order to remedy it or stop an ongoing property rights violation. Against the same individual, not you can't like enslave or rob or whatever from a bunch of innocent individuals in order to stop a violation somewhere else. It's purely directly individual for individual, and that sort of thing. So that's my simple political views. I'll refresh here. George wrote, the old McDonald's diet demonstrated not to work in at least one instance. That's funny. We talk about food groups, right? Um, Shema, I would write that our foundation footholds, sorry, not I would write. Uh, I would say that these are different angles on seeking to gain understanding. Our foundation, footholds, and seeking to gain understanding, all kind of the same thing. Just kind of angles on. Um, Remember something in the world of reasons, which is your whole mind is in the world of reasons, and understanding gets like stored in your mind, and then, or at least the precursors to it, and then you kind of interact consciously. Um, but and certainly seeking to gain understanding isn't something that you directly experience, so it's like invisible. So we need to um, when we're talking about what something is, and we're talking about something that's in like the world of reasons, right? The physical world, your mind, and even something that you as a being do. That's not in your conscious field itself. It's not something you directly experience. So talking about what it is, we need to sort of build to it, and we may never get to exactly what it is, but we make more distinctions about it. Um, I don't know how great that answer is for the moment, but I'll keep this question in mind. Uh, but in essence, we're trying to investigate seeking understanding um, this whole way through in alchemy, and I can't really, if I could say it is such and such and be done with it, then alchemy would have been one webinar. Maybe one day I will be able to do that, but currently it takes at least 30 webinars and possibly more. But of course, I joke, but we're making great progress here in a very real way for people's lives. Frederico wrote, the most nutrient dense will be the way to go with plant-based whole foods. This coming from a once avid meat connoisseur. Forget counting and measuring. Eat as much as you want of raw and alive fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, cooked grains to provide maximum benefits to the body. Google the China study or watch Forks Over Knives and Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead and learn more. Cool, I'll check into that. I think I'm reaching a point in my life where I kind of want to directly go after some of this, some stuff regarding nutrition. And I agree that that kind of thing sounds more right to me, for sure. Like, but well, I'm not like the arbiter, so what I say about this should be taken with a grain of salt either way. But anyway, just kind of on this on the surface in a simple way, appreciating what you said, Frederico, and and saying that as blurry as my vision is regarding nutrition, then that conforms to something that seems right. However that, but acknowledging gray is helpful, right? That then you can look for things you know. Um, one thing with nutrition is it's um, there's a way that it's not like super central to it, where it matters for sure, and that is a little bit like money in a sense. But the difference is with money we start out, unless we inherit it, we start out screwed, and we need to get to a stable base. We don't start out like when we're young, but like when we leave the house, basically, unless we just have, unless we're not. I basically sort of did, where I didn't really have a stable base when it came to income, and I had to make it for myself entrepreneurially or something. I didn't graduate from college with a very useful degree or set of skills for getting a job, and plus my personality type isn't that great for getting a job, especially at the time. Now maybe who knows what now I'm older, so maybe that's harder. Um, anyway, one way or the other, we have an issue with money. Um, it's interesting how that relates to nutrition. Certainly, I'm sure we all have a relative lack of energy uh, based on compared to how good our nutrition could be. But there's a way in which we're somewhat stable when it comes to nutrition for a while, and that with money, we're in a way that we're really not with money, as far as I can tell. So I prioritized money. Um, I prioritized like a marriage relationship for myself. That for a lot of people that's not necessary, but for me, it was somehow going to affect like my motivation with money. I thought, and my stable base. But really, money is somehow money or some substitute for it. And if you have a substitute, great. Like if you could survive without it in a stable way, without robbing, like robbing for people basically, um, then okay. But there's I still to this day I can't find a substitute for money as kind of this kind of foundational thing in a certain way on Earth. I don't mean like it's fully foundational, but there's what I mean is that practically speaking, it just keeps drawing your focus back unless you get it taken care of. Uh, Health doesn't act quite the same way unless we have an issue, but certainly there'll be more energy and longevity, from it. So it's one of those like kind of it's pretty obviously pretty close to the foundation, if not right at the foundation, for whatever that's worth. But what that did was it kind of again it's checking off things that are kind of black and white, right? Like it's black and white that eating reasonably will be okay while we get some other stable base. Like we'll have a stable base for a while eating reasonably. Whereas if we don't tend to money, then it's really going to draw our focus back. Like it's going to prevent us from really kind of helping others and seeking understanding if we don't have money. But I think it'll multiply our efforts. It'll be as far as I can tell, nutrition is kind of like a multiplier on our efforts, whereas a lack of money is like a full block. So it's more like an opportunity thing when it comes to nutrition. It can be presented in terms of, well, you're just going to kill over and die, but realistically, you won't, right? Realistically, whatever my grandparents knew, 3 out of 4 of them lived to like 90, right? And one of them lived to like in the 70s. So it's more of an opportunity-based thing, more of a multiplier on your efforts. Whereas, again, I don't know of a way for money not to just be a full block, where it just has to be tended to if we don't have a stable base amount of it. But all the more reason not to need an ever-increasing amount of it, right? So that it doesn't stay that way. You want to get that as much done with as possible. You have some stable base of money, even if you just have money for the next 6 months and a decent way to make money, then at least you can just coast with that and say, look, as long as I have my decent way to make money, that frees up my focus for other things otherwise. And I have a buffer of 6 months, then that's fine. Then I can just worry if something happens to my ongoing way to make money, then I can do something in the next 6 months to a year. Maybe I would probably want more of like a year or two, actually, personally, but it just depends on your situation, how realistic it is for you to find another job and so forth. Okay, just kind of a thought exercise to illustrate how I think about things. It's not that the topic was or wasn't critical, but oh, cool. And Chris agrees. Chris wrote, the proper view is an analogy to a car. The body is a vehicle, and if it has the proper fuel and is tuned, then it does not backfire as much and gets you around more efficiently with a clear mind. So in the background, it's important. Right. And then the question is figuring out the priorities in terms of importance, right? We not only want to identify things as importance, but we need to figure out what comes first, what comes second. Because there's a lot of things that could be important in life, but then we need to get a sense of it. And one thing I thought of for mentioning today that I'll at least just kind of mention to some degree right now, I touched on it last time, but it can kind of be maybe our last, except for discussion, example for today on the main idea about extremes and simple scenarios. What if we just get importance right regarding, well, I kind of put in this order, right? Seek understanding about what's true, regarding what's important, about what leads to good, right, for yourself and others. So we certainly need then to be able to get things accurate. By the way, there's also this other thing in passing about accuracy. When it comes to knowing what's true, we don't necessarily need to know what's true often in fine detail. Sometimes if we just get the big obvious stuff, you can get really, really far, because in life it's not like we just get splattered on the side of the road the minute we don't get like really precise stuff exactly right. Right? So we just kind of need to perfectly get within the margin of error sometimes. So if we can, even when we're just talking about money or seeking understanding, or we think about planning versus taking action, think about someone who's trying to do this website and make it work over the course of a year, right? They don't have to get everything perfectly accurate. Right? And it can even take them 3 years, and if they succeed within 3 years, they'll be fine, right? My dad went to law school for 4 years, and then he applied for a job at law school when it was correct. The company did get sold, and he stayed on that track for a little while, but then eventually went for a law job. Right, so that was 4 years just in school at night. So if someone makes a website work within 3 years, then great. Now, we know that sometimes people make websites work within 6 months, right, or something. So, or a year. So even if somebody didn't get all kinds of stuff just perfectly guessed right, and every action was just dead on and so forth, as long as they hit the target within 3 years or 4 years or who knows, 10 years, right? I mean, I was an entrepreneur starting when I was 21 or 22. I think it was 21 when I did my first course for myself, doing speed learning, right? Teaching people speed reading and memory stuff and so forth. And I never looked back. I didn't become a millionaire until, I mean, I didn't even get to like 2,000 a month until I started working with Mike doing stuff online like 10 years later. And I didn't become a millionaire for like 8 years after that, or roughly. And then I became a multimillionaire the next year, right? And now I'm a multimillionaire. So that was like 20 years, right? So, and it seems worth it. And people tell me how young I am to be driving a car like I drive, right? So all this is just to illustrate there's such a big margin of error, right? The way that God made the world, as I said, it's rigged. Just like with a video game, you don't have to get everything right in your first character. There's such a huge margin of error that if you think of perfection as just getting within the margin of error, which is huge, you just need to see the big obvious things and have enough judgment there that you get within the margin of error, and then you get there. You become a millionaire, or you realize the right just to cross off big obvious stuff regarding violation of property rights. There's a whole lot of gray area with property rights and what we do about it, right? And what we do if someone violates them and how we remedy that. But if we just start by getting the massive, huge things right, then the world would be so much better and calmer and less violent, right? The number of psychopaths is fairly small in the world. If we just don't have a system where normal otherwise reasonably good, nice, caring people turn into what would otherwise be psychopathic activity, right? Working for, simplistically put, working for government or various criminal things and so forth. There's stuff outside of government that could turn like what would otherwise be just normal people into psychopaths. If we can just if we can just narrow the world down without like systems for creating, having people be effectively psychopaths, right? ISIS, right? And things like that. That, without ISIS, maybe a lot of people just wouldn't join it and act like psychopaths. So you get rid of these like systems for it, right? The big obvious stuff. And then you narrow the world down to where there's just like relatively few people acting like psychopaths, and then the whole problem becomes much more manageable, you know. So again, anyway, just wanted to point, my point in the last few minutes has been, when I talk about perfection, often that just means hitting a huge target by not by kind of making adjustments to your whatever, the gun you're shooting, and this, just to stick with the hitting the target metaphor, that you just need to eliminate some big obvious stuff that would have caused you to not hit your target. But if the target's really big, to perfectly hit the target doesn't mean that you have to perfectly hit a tiny target that's far away. But if you have to hit a huge target that's close to you, you can do that perfectly. That still might there still might be people missing it, but maybe all they need to do to not miss it is to cross off some big obvious stuff that they could notice if they just thought accurately just about the big stuff. And that's it. Looking back, that's so much of what I've done to become a multimillionaire is notice this big obvious stuff and just never do it, right? And because it's clear and obvious, it's not tempting. But there's all sorts of stuff that I've probably been pointing them out, right? And I'll continue to when I talk about business relationships and stuff with our offer. It's kind of big and obvious once we look at it the right way, but then people aren't looking at it the right way, and they're doing big obvious stuff that's wrong. And just by not doing that, right? The most famous example in OMG is just, how about having people teaching the stuff that are actually doing it, and having it be week after week with office hours or something like that, where they're interacting with people week after week, so it keeps people caring. Right? You care about people that you're seeing over and over again, and you start with people that are caring in the first place, but then you have week after week, then people also get navigated. No matter how good a job you do, you can't give directions that are going to work for people without further Q&A and navigation. That's just not how life works when it comes to making money. So how about if it's an ongoing weekly interaction and navigation with people that are actually doing it, right? That's kind of big and obvious, but it's incredibly rare. And then what if we have a culture of abundance? Oh, and I was talking to Mike, and I likened it to like Alcoholics Anonymous. Absolutely nothing about this is comparing GH to being alcoholics. Oh, but all of us, when it comes to like the authority mentality, the school mentality, the being told what to do, and results being relative to a test or what an authority figure says is right, and then we're supposed to get a grade or a result based on that, right? We're addicted to that without even realizing it. We're surrounded by that, and the people that are influencing us are take that mentality for granted. Along with that mentality is like the idea of you don't talk about what you make, right? That's reasonable in many cases in life. I agree that in many cases in life you don't talk about what you make. But if you're in a group of people where it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? What if you didn't talk about how long you've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous? That wouldn't make any sense. In normal life, I don't walk up to someone, meet them, and tell them how long I've been sober, right? I don't have an issue with alcohol. I'm just using this as a scenario. And if someone does have an issue with alcohol, I don't judge that whatsoever. We have different body chemistries and environments in life and things that have gone on with ourselves. So when I say I don't have an issue with alcohol, I don't mean that like I'm better because of it. But just to clarify. But anyhow, in OMG, it matters to talk about our successes and what's working for us and what we make, because we're helping ourselves break out of the limiting mentality and the standards and norms that we're generally surrounded with, right? So we create a culture like that of abundance, of sharing about success and money getting, because it's not based on a degree anymore, right? In real life, you could say, oh, I'm a doctor, oh, I'm a lawyer, oh, I'm an accountant, oh, I'm whatever, I work as an office manager, or whatever we do, and people already have a sense of our status and this and that, to the extent that that matters. Do I want status in OMG? Hell no. No, I don't want that. But we do want to have a different feeling of standards and norms because that's going to invisibly affect everyone. And it's going to feel, different. Feeling like it's normal to make 5 figures a month with your own endeavors, that matters. Feeling like you're bad for not doing so, we don't want that, right? And everything coming from me reinforces that it's not about that. That's why when people first get into OMG coaching, if they watch my stuff, my introduction, and so and my now I have a few videos after that, like I call success framework. I tell people get time on your side. It's not about how fast you do it. We're not in a race, and I mean that fully and literally. We're not in a race. Not like wink, wink. We're in a race, but we're not. Not like we're in a race, but pretend like we're not. We're absolutely not at all in any race. Okay, but feeling like people are succeeding, it just really matters, right? So anyway, my point is that once I explain it, that's kind of common sense stuff, but OMG is a very unique program. There's not other programs really like it. And yet I just tried to get the major, again, obvious once you look at it a certain way, stuff right. And that's essentially what's causing the success. The other stuff is mostly details. The topic matters, like basically, being able to get free or mostly free traffic, taking advantage. Another thing, right? You make the internet, make it super simple with the internet. There's a big change in the world. Let's try to fit with the internet, right? Years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, depending on how you measure. What changed? Well, if we make it big and obvious, we can maybe, one thing I noticed, there's 2 major things that are fundamentally different, that are new. And that's search engines, which isn't only natural search. There's paid traffic based on search engines too. But search engines and low overhead. And so let's make sure that we have a program that helps people take advantage of that. And so it's based on low overhead traffic, right, related to search engines, right? Free or mostly free traffic and search engines. If we focus there, that's on something that's new. There's a big new value in the world, search engines and low overhead with leads, with traffic. That's the big new value. Let's harness that wind. Let's sail that current. So another thing that is fundamentally part of what's baked into OMG, right? So it's not that I get all the details right. As a matter of fact, that's one of the first things people notice sometimes, especially if they're oriented that way, is they get an OMG and they start noticing details that could be better, right? I agree, right? But there's kind of an unlimited amount of details that could be better anyway. Certainly, we're always making more details better, by the way, always working on that. But that's not going to change things, like overall very much. What really matters is mainly the things I talked about. If we get those right, and then we're within the margin of error, and things work out. So just more examples about that. So that's the margin of error idea regarding perfection can often be perfectly getting within the margin of error, which is very different than perfectly getting some exact, precise, tiny thing right every time, you see? So when I talk about even making the world perfect, there could be a huge margin of error, right? We're just getting rid of these big, obvious contradictions, and then we're getting rid of more contradictions and so forth. But there's potentially a big margin of error there. But anyway, so very often perfection of understanding is easy to hit because it's just within a big margin of error. And that's why it's realistic and plausible to go for. And then the other idea was regarding the idea of importance. If you just get importance right, I talked about this in the previous OMG Live. I spent all my preparation focus getting to this idea, and so the talk itself, although it was very well received, was certainly rambling to some degree. But again, that's details. I care about details, but I care more about, if I hit a target, I'd rather it be closer to the center. But if all I need to do is hit a target, I spent days trying to figure out what's kind of one thing I can say that can be a game changer. And at least I pointed out that our mind will get importance wrong by default, right? It'll be the things that's kind of big, that seems big and obvious. It's close in the environment when there's what's new in the environment, and close and big. But the real meaning of importance is what's going to have the most impact overall. If we just get the sense of importance right between where we direct our focus and where we manage, managing our resources, focusing our resources, then what if we take that to the extreme? What if you were able? Now, we're not always able. So if I take it to the extreme in one way, if I say, what if I feel bad? What if I feel inadequate because I didn't get importance right all the time? Is that useful? Of course not. But what if I say, if I were to get importance right more often than not, or all the time, where to focus, right? Where to put my resources, where to prioritize, what my goals should be. What if I had an accurate sense of where the most impact would be? Would that always be helpful? Yeah, right? Take it to the extreme as far as I could tell. It's always helpful. So understanding the nature of importance then, right? Because importance is so important, understanding more about the nature of it is also going to be a good use of my resources overall. And remember, I have a kind of a simple scheme. Take care of your stable base. And then you're not going to have a problem with this whole idea of like, oh, do I take action, stop overthinking things, blah, blah, blah. If you're just okay, if you reduce your spending if you need to, and increase your income if you need to, in a way that's basically stable, then you don't have to worry. Seeking understanding about important things is going to be great. And it's going to lead to plenty of action. And again, it is what I did to become a millionaire. So you can use whatever method you want to use, but my coaching is what? It's about, what do I tell other coaches in OMG? Just teach about what you do, what you did, and what you do currently. This is what I have done, and this is what I currently do in order to make money, become a multimillionaire, etc. All right, let me pop down to the bottom. And if I ever skip something, it's because I didn't read it. If I read it, my rule is I say it, I address it, and we're good. Okay, don't have to refresh. And we'll do whatever, a little bit more discussion, and then we'll always be continuing. There's always a new alchemy. And once I'm done with kind of the part that I promised, right, kind of basically through September, then I wouldn't worry about the world won't necessarily come to an end, or alchemy won't necessarily come to an end at that point. But it's kind of nice just to, I just did it this way, just to kind of have a certain thing, and then it's particularly bonus after that. And especially doing discussion, very likely that I'll be more than happy to do discussions with you guys. I enjoy this. Absolutely, Michael. Yeah, I think I'm very happy with this, the way this webinar turned out. Again, that never means like I think I got all the details right. I just talked about the target thing. Generally though, the target that I was looking to hit within the margin of error, we made good progress, I think, with that important idea. And that central idea had to do with enlarging, taking things to the extremes. I didn't really talk about looking at the premise, and that's going to be something that we're going to need to address, and I'm not going to do it in this webinar. That's related to taking things to the extremes, kind of the extreme like starting point. So you can work on that yourself if you want, but I'll get to it in alchemy. And then I also showed about using super simple scenarios. And sometimes you don't even know what scenario to use, so you just start with a kind of any one of a few go-to scenarios, right? That you like for yourself. Like I talked about being on an island, could be related to money, it could be related to relationships. You can imagine a scenario where it's kind of simple and someone's not doing what you want, and then you try to apply any of these things, justice, fairness, whatever. And then sometimes you could start with a simple scenario and try to apply that you don't know. You start with a topic or a question you have. You have no idea how to start with a scenario. You just make a simple scenario that you don't have any idea how it relates yet, and you try to relate it. And if you can't, then just do a different scenario. So that's simple and try to relate it to that. Right? First start with people on an island, then start with you're dealing with one person, they're not doing what you want, or you're dealing with someone, they are doing what you want, or you're just by yourself and you're working on a task, whatever it might be, and keep trying until you can relate it to that, the question at hand. If you don't know where else to start. What's that? Poking around for a foothold, right? You poke around for a foothold. Once you find one or potentially find one, you build out from there. That's your framework, and then the details follow after that. Missed most of the webinar. Had to take a son to bat mitzvah. Looking forward to the replay. Excellent. Looking forward to any questions in the future. Shema wrote, having a next level higher norm for money getting is not also we are better than. Right, absolutely. Money doesn't make you better any more than better fashion makes you better. I know in one sense it's dead obvious what I'm not saying. I don't mean like I'm the first guy to say that. But it's good to see how it works, right? People say, oh, money doesn't make you better, but then that's the idea seeps in, right? Correct ideas are better, but nothing makes you better overall. You never want to even open up the question, am I better overall than somebody else? And anything can be better within its own box, right? If we're talking about a situation where we're keeping score with money or where you're trying to make money, then more money is better. But it could be up to a certain point too, and then you box it there. Okay, so if maybe you say, well, can I tell the difference between 10,000 a month or 20,000? Yes, I can. I clearly want 20,000, so more money is better. Up to 20,000. Can I tell the difference between 20 and 30? Right? And at some point you might say, well, actually, I don't know if I could tell the difference between 20 or 30. How about I draw the line at 20 and I say, let's just get there and let's just stipulate actually that more isn't better after 20 for now. And I'll just relax and I'll let it be 20. You see how it can work? And it's pretty nice to have specificity regarding things like that. It's pretty nice to have a light at the end of the tunnel. There was a time when Greg was doing 3 office hours a week in the end of 2012. No, it was late. It was 2013. It'd been going on for about a year, and he was the only one doing it. There was no other coaches at that point. Fletch was starting to help people with a different little program that we tried out. But then I realized it was just kind of like a same old for Greg, and I wanted to change the game, and so I just ended that version of NHB. That was before Project X, and then we had nothing. I had nothing to replace it with, but it was nice for him to have a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, we'll continue it through whatever, something like November, and it was great for him to kind of be done with that segment of things. And then we came up with Project X. We had Fletch to help out, who was amazing, right, and still is, and you know, like everyone gets better and better. Starts out amazing, gets better and better. I'm just grateful every time I think about anyone I work with. I'm so grateful. But that was Project X, but we didn't have Project X when I just let it go, and we just ended there, and we had nothing conceptually for a little while, and then that's when we developed Project X, and then things really took off even better, much better from there. I don't know if that's necessarily correct, Michael. Monahan, who says balance on the physical realm is a matter of being centered between two extremes. There's places where alchemy, certainly, plenty, but there's places where alchemy diverges from the general like Buddhist thought and so forth. Suzanne, and even if that turns out to be the case, it's not so much the balance that's doing it, right? It's like having a stable base financially or something to substitute for it, like being a monk in a monastery. If that's where you're going to live the rest of your life, and your food is taken care of, and you grow your own vegetables, then that could be your stable base for what amounts to money, as long as that works for you. But having some sort of stable base, you basically know you have the stable base if your focus isn't constantly drawn towards making money. In a way that is distracting. Like your focus could be drawn to making money if you intentionally want that to be the thing that you're working on. But if you're trying to work on something else, but you're pulled towards making money, if that makes sense, when you don't want to be, is another way to put it. Where it kind of has to take priority. Like there's a way that money or something like it has to be a priority until you get to where it doesn't have to be. And I don't know a way around that. Again, if so, but I'm even allowing for other ways around it. I just say that or some substitute for it. So you see, I keep it black and white. Suzanne says, thanks for another great webinar, and thanks for saying there's no timetable. I did quit my day job, burned the boats, and will focus on going forward. I have a cushion for about 9 months. I feel great and excited for the future. Wonderful. That's terrific, Suzanne. Yeah, I mean, if you've had a job for a while anyway, you can always get another one, right, if necessary. But yeah, 9 months is a great window to have, and you're going to be in good shape one way or the other, like I talked about in 9 months. Mike Long wrote about what I talked about with wrapping up that NHP program with Greg. Um, think about wrapping up the very first NHP coaching program in 2013. I was actually stepping in and doing some coaching with my money getting with Mike webinars, and they were such a heavy lift. Oh, right, Mike did that. They did help get Joshua Fletcher and Joe Marfolio more involved, but it was a real challenge. It wasn't going to get us where we wanted to go. Right, exactly. So we let go of that as well. We let go of that, which is called Endgame. We let go of our NHP coaching. We didn't have OMG Live yet, and that cleared the way. But we had great stuff to work with, great people, and then it all came together quickly. Darcy wrote, "Isn't being," and I know I skipped over a lot of questions. I may get back to them. But it's kind of it, right? When you can't tell, right? If I only can deal with some questions and not others, you pick at random, in different ways. Isn't being better, or any scorekeeping per se, or comparison just antithetical to making our own personal progress towards whatever goals we have? Seems to deplete from ideas of abundance, that we are all the same. We are all capable, but we may just be at different places of awareness and knowledge. By the way, I just spent many days listening to audios of Bob Proctor while on holidays. Yeah, okay, let's see here what we can know regarding this. Scorekeeping, as I said, if there's a situation where it clearly does make sense, great. And then otherwise, I wouldn't do it, right? You want to go directly, basically you go directly for whatever the real goal is. And it's not a shortcut to keep score or to look at what other people are doing. If the goal itself inherently involves, like with Google SEO, it inherently involves ranking higher than other websites. Now there's basically nearly unlimited keywords out there, so you can always go wide for other keywords and be creative that way. But even for whatever keywords those are, you're still ranking above other sites, and you only need to beat out other sites, essentially, right? So, if the nature of the goal involves comparison or competition within its scope, then it does involve that. But you're still looking at the goal, the real goal itself, the real building block or thing that you want to achieve itself, right, or the bottleneck. And unless it forces you into competition and comparison, then I wouldn't go there. Then it would just be this kind of approximative shortcut that's ineffective, that should set off a red flag that your mind is using to try to make a gray area into black. And instead, you just want to go for the semi-soft lock, and so forth. Oh, you're welcome, Darcy. And then, great. So it seems to deplete from the ideas of abundance, right? That's correct. It depletes again unless the goal itself is just naturally. Now, we're always any goal that involves competition, it's just a building block anyway, right? It's not the final goal. The final things in life that we need to achieve, or just goodness dissolving contradictions, those are abundant. And so life is basically abundant. And then there just might be some situations that are worthwhile that involve some competition, but they're never going to be the end-all be-all. What you can do is you can go after that, but if it involves competition or being better than someone else, you can never assure yourself that you're necessarily going to be better than somebody else. And so you just realize it's never going to be the end-all be-all, and if you don't achieve it, then you don't achieve it. You can almost assure yourself of beating out other people by starting by competing in an area where you're equal or have an advantage starting out, and then focusing, and then not having mental blocks, right? Especially the whole self-image thing. If you're not trying to feed your self-image while everyone else is, then you're going to have a tremendous advantage, all over their life. Um, but so you can, typically win, right? With either your own greatness plus what I'm showing you. Um, but still, you can't assure yourself, right? And so keep that in mind. It's never, and therefore it's never necessary. Anything that involves competition is never necessary in order to, get where we're trying to get to ultimately. And then that we're all the same. I'm always a little careful about that. I mean, we were clearly different regarding individual skill. I mean, and you know this. We're not saying the opposite of this whatsoever. But just to clarify, there's um, how do I say this? I If you take the idea that we're all the same, and even in the way that it would have to be met, not even caricaturing the idea, but like even the idea that you can achieve anything you go after or nearly anything, well, someone could just shoot you. Right? Again, take it to the extreme, and then you at least in this particular life, if you have multiple ones, and I'm not saying people do, but I'm also not saying you don't. Um, then in at least in this life, you're not going to achieve that goal, right? If someone just shoots you in the head and kills you. So and similarly, but it there really are like someone will encounter this in like multi-level marketing, right? If you're doing Amway or Herbalife or Free Life or whatever. I personally have done it way far in the past before I did online stuff, 15, almost 20 years ago, Amway, and then later on Free Life, which are multi-level. Um, with neither did I have like particular success. My success were when I started doing information products in my own course. There's a lesson there that I think matters, which is they'll try to create a culture there where it's like your fault if you don't succeed, and everyone's the same, and it's just a matter of your effort. But everyone isn't the same. If you're basically in your 40s, it's just way absolutely people in their 20s can succeed with multi-level marketing, but it's wildly easier to succeed if you're like in your 40s. And depending on your just what your career is, what your social situation is, whether you're naturally more of a networker and so forth. So some people are much more reasonably able to succeed. There's plenty of people who might be doing multi-level marketing where, like myself, where there's another career where it's just much better suited for them. And it could be working for themselves, right? Especially since the internet. Um, so now, ironically, with something like OMG, while of course it's not suited for everyone, it is interesting to note that generally getting around people that are succeeding very well, generally with the broad nature of it, and with the focus on getting traffic, every single business endeavor needs traffic, and it will in that way help everyone, even if it's not just Google ranking traffic, just looking at how Liz gets Amazon traffic and looking at all the other ways people get traffic with OMG and thinking that way, then any business endeavor, or partnering, it'll help you partner with other people and so forth. It's actually relevant in most every case with people. Plus, we tell them, straight up in the sales letter what it's about. So that's why I'm comfortable with, with the no refunds and how it applies to everyone. But even then, I wouldn't. If it's not for someone, it's not for someone. I don't try to force it down someone's throat, obviously. Try to be real clear about it up front before people join what we're doing. Anyway, just be a little careful about thinking that people are the same. Also, it's anything we want to be really careful in terms of like one thing that really helps me not judge other people generally, and the general nature of judging can really sneak in the back door very easily. So I could say, oh no, I'm not judging them overall, but there's the subtext of what some people say constantly is a general judgment, um, like where it's more than just that activity that they're talking about. And so realizing that we don't know where people started, and we don't know what stuff from their current environment is pushing on them and creating difficulties. And I maintain a kind of just kind of the way my mind is set up at this point, the way it's wired. It's kind of constantly relatively front and center to my mind. I don't want to exaggerate, but just it's something I tend in practice not to really lose sight of. Is that like I made a post where someone wrote in one of the Facebook groups for members of OMG, they said maybe I haven't been putting the focus that I should into OMG, but I'm really looking to step it up. And I wrote something that was kind of counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people. I said, how do you know that you haven't been putting as much focus as you should? Maybe it wasn't the right timing for you, realistically, until now. You're smart enough to get into OMG, right? It was only open at a certain time and it closed, and you got in. Um, and maybe even the small amount of focus relatively that you were putting in, maybe that was the best use of your resources. Maybe it wasn't, of course, but maybe it was, and maybe now is the right time for you to really delve into it. But again, it's really kind of easy. It was easy for me to come to that. It wasn't like hard because I'm constantly aware again that I don't know what other people are dealing with, and it helps. Even just as a random or more, I don't know if it's extreme or not, but you could be talking to your accountant about something, and you don't know, maybe he just had a disaster in his personal life. This hasn't happened to me. I'm just as a random example. You're dealing with people, you just never know what's happened with them recently. Um, and I keep in mind that maybe something did, and not like I treat everyone with kid gloves or not. I just mean like if they're acting like in kind of a surprising fashion, or even if they're not, I don't know, just realizing that it's the extreme nature of that helps it to be easy to see. So even if there's not something extreme the person's dealing with, it just reminds me that I don't know their mental context, and that helps me, and their life context, and that helps me to not project. It helps clarify things. So even like subtle things from someone else, I'll notice better consciously, not just like some people are good at picking up subconscious cues. I'm not saying I'm good at that or good at reading people, but if I'm good at not, um, what I'm good at is not projecting kind of my own thoughts and beliefs and assumptions on other people. And instead of being good at reading people by picking up, by being so aware, instead of having more awareness, I just have less clutter. And I don't mean less than everyone else or whatever, but less than I used to, let's say. Um, and I pick up on a decent amount of things, right? That it overall it tends to accumulate and help me. The way that I interact with people tends to snowball and help. Whether or not I still again, it's hitting a target, right? That might be wide. I might miss all kinds of stuff. I might not pick up on all kinds of stuff. But overall, I'm getting ahead in my relationships with people. Not falling behind for the most part. Um, and again, I do it by decluttering and by just having that extreme go-to picture of, their mom could have just died or anything like that. Um, then it's just a quick reminder of I don't know where they're at, and it's kind of big and easy to see, and just like in keeping with the theme for this. So thank you for what you wrote, Darcy. It sparked everything that it sparked in my answer. Right. We knew when to let go of what was not working and move on. And I'll tell you, what helps you to let go of things that are not working is if you have kind of that cushion, that stable base, you pay real close attention to like ongoing monthly income commitments or things analogous to that, like things similar, including your kind of implied promises you make with other people. Again, including your own self-esteem, including what you project to other people. The minute you project to other people that you're someone that makes a lot of money ongoing, now that's like a high monthly upkeep, and it makes it much harder to let go. And you don't need to really, it isn't that you need to take risks in life so much as you do need to poke around, right? And that's a nice distinction. Poking around and taking risks, if those all look like the same berries, right? But they're two different berries. I don't really take risks at this point. The only time you need to take a risk is if you're just going to metaphorically die, like fall in a pit the other way, right? Like if your back is to the wall, you might have to take a risk. If the alternative is just absolute disaster, then anything might be better, including a risk. But once you're away from that, then I don't take risks. But what I do is poke around, and poking around might mean I try something that I won't know how well it's working for 6 months, and it might take some money to do so and some time, and it might all turn out to not to be kind of a dead end, including with people and trying out people and relationships with people and so forth. In every case, I set things up for success. I don't want to hedge my bets. I have boundaries, but then within that, I want to go for it. You see how that's not a risk? It's not a risk if you set things up so that you can afford it just fine, right? So I I don't classify that as taking a risk because that blends in with the other type of risk where you're risking some sort of actual thing going wrong or failure or whatever. If I'm poking around, again, if I'm trying something that may or may not work for 6 months, then again, or trying a promotion for a new product, then again, it's not a risk, right? It's actually the right way to do things. And I'll be fine either way. And overall, I'm going to hit on things that work, right? It's like if you try to rank for 10 different keywords and you're doing things reasonably right, some of them are going to work. It's not like you're taking a risk on one keyword, taking a risk on that keyword or on this keyword. You're just doing things correctly. In order to do that, you overall make sure you're okay, that you could absorb whatever the issue is. And again, overall, it's a good strategy. So in order to let go, you need to have a stable foundation that is always there. And then you can let go, then you just let go based on resource management, based on importance and how things are going, and having a general sense of what the impact is going to be. And zooming in, getting a sense of, well, what's working, what isn't. I don't want to let go of Greg for sure, he's amazing, but let's let go of this particular product in the way that it's going, and I still have Greg and Mike, and together we have a clean slate, and we'll create the next thing kind of from scratch in a sense. We have plenty of building blocks like over to the side, we could think of it, that we can pull in, but we have like a blank whiteboard in front of us, metaphorically or actually, or a blank piece of paper. It doesn't mean we don't, like, and again, we have all our past experiences, our past resources, past videos we've made if we want them. Those all still exist, but they're not on the whiteboard to start with. We import them. First we figure out what is it we want, we don't want, and then we filter and import as we want, and then we might have open questions. We don't have anything that we've already built that'll address the following. Can we build something? Or can we poke around to try to build something? Right? So as helpful as that was, then that is. Joseph said, thank you, David. I hear your words during my day-to-day when I reflect at night before sleep. I'm still fighting my fear of going to meet people. I have horrific scarring on my arms and legs. The looks and staring still bothers me. I haven't learned how to put that in a frame that feels truthful to me. Thank you again. Oh, that's interesting. Let's see what we can do here. It's interesting as a question, of course, as a situation. Then I'm not saying that that's interesting or not. But as a question, okay, let's look at a different extreme. All right. And I'm doing this to poke around, but it just so yeah, okay. So, and I don't, I'm doing this just because I think it's going to be effective. I'm going to talk about my car for a moment, but I'm not looking for reasons to talk about my car here. But it's just the thing that's occurring to me, and if I put it aside, there's nothing else pops into my mind. So let's go with it. So when I drive my car, right, Rolls Royce, then it gets looks, pictures, staring, comments, and of course they're positive, right? So there's a different extreme, but it might help us shed light on things. But even as I say that, I can really imagine the like turning this to your advantage potentially, because it's kind of a conversation piece potentially. Now I realize you don't want to necessarily come out and say it. They don't want to come out and talk about it directly, right? They'll generally look to like look because it's interesting, right? Anything unexpected, someone's going to want to understand, get more of a sense of it, right? I'm willing to bet. What we want to do is figure out how do we ride the natural current, right? The natural current is it's kind of interesting because it's unexpected to people. Generally, people are going to care and they're going to want you to be better off. They're going to feel like you have something that you're dealing with that's kind of a disadvantage somehow, right? Either you've just been through suffering and they care about that and they wish you didn't have to go through that. And so at least that in and of itself, even if it's over now, is a disadvantage and that you went through something very tough. Whether it was being caught in a fire or whatever else caused that. Or something like that, some accident or attack. uh, it's interesting to note that it really can function if you find a way, like a conversation piece that breaks the ice and gets people to feel kind of more comfortable with you, right? And then it's a puzzle on how to do that, right? We don't have something built into our culture to make that super easy. Um, uh, but trying to see if anything occurs to me now. Other people could even come up with something um, on this that I might not. I don't mean now in the comments or not, but it's a fascinating question, right? As soon as we ask that, so I started talking about the car. Let's go into that again to see if that'll jog anything loose. So um, sometimes people feel just fully good about taking a picture of my car or whatever. Sometimes they feel kind of apologetic if I'm taking a picture and I walk up. But so that's interesting, right? They'll almost feel like apologetic. But um, but I let them know, I let them know that it's totally okay, and that of course it's normal. So that's a thing, right? It really is normal, right? If someone has scarring like that, it's normal for someone to, of course, first notice it, and then they almost want to address in order to get past it, right? Because they know that um, it's like an issue one way or the other, right? See, and Shema sends you love, right? And of course, that's going to be almost everyone's natural reaction, is they wish you well about this, right, Joseph? So what we don't know, the interesting thing about it is what it does is it creates a situation that is hanging out there, and it is like where neither you nor someone else knows how to address it, but yet it has to kind of be addressed because if you don't address it, it's like you're ignoring it, something that's kind of obvious. And if you do address it, then well, there's not a good way to get there. As soon as you come up with a good way to get there, um, uh, that possibly, and you might already have stuff like this, but possibly, um, uh, um, uh, sorry, I was thinking about like a joke about like something different, but it may or may not work. Like, sorry, it's not really coming together exactly right. Right, once addresses loses focus, but you can even turn it, don't worry, I'm not contagious. Yeah, but if you say that, then then I want something better than that. I want the issue with don't worry, I'm not contagious is like it kind of starts from the idea that it's a bad thing, and it really isn't bad at all, right? Like of course, it would be ideal not to live with if it was causing to the extent that it causes you discomfort and all that. So that, of course, is suboptimal, and I would certainly wish you healing regarding anything like that. But socially or anything, it's not. Um, and it's on your arms and legs. It's not on. Um, really, no matter where it is for someone, um, I guess it could possibly be more of a disadvantage, but still could be, anything could be turned to an advantage the best we can or just dealt with the best we can. But if it was on your face, it'd be additionally different. But again, either way. Sometimes I let something just kind of go real time, right, with you guys, where I'm kind of poking around in my head, and I try to do as much out loud as possible, but I do it on purpose. I'm not. It's not like I get too sucked into a tangent or not. I just sometimes the kind of real time thing is fun to do or useful, whatever. Um, is it about our norms and standards? Really, what it is, there's not like a cultural way to do it. I mean, in almost every case, people are going to care, right? This is going to be a positive for you, Joseph, as soon as it just kind of gets addressed. Like, but the question is how to get there. Um, there's definitely a way, by the way. Like this is one of those things where um, is one of those things where just learning to ask the right question. This is the kind of question that I'm sure is inevitable, where there's a way to kind of get there. Um, if they're not particularly painful, even if sometimes they might be physically uncomfortable, you could say that one of the questions. I'm poking around, so this may not, but this might just kind of help us poke. Um, right. You could cover them. There might be times when it doesn't work as well, or um, let's see. Let me do mine real quick. Uh, you could say early on in a conversation, sometimes people have a question about with the scarring that I have on my arms and I have it on my legs too, whether it caused me like ongoing discomfort and they're worried and they want to express concern. But don't worry, it's in the past where it's of course kind of disfiguring, but I'm okay now. And if we were ever talking later and you wanted to ask me about it, it's also okay to ask me about it, just so you know. Um, like just something like that, is reasonable, right? Um, then really, yeah, just early on, but I can imagine if I had that, I'd be like, hey, I'm David, and what do you do? And you're talking a bit, and then you say, what one question people often have, um, of course, kind of early on, they're wondering if the scarring that I have causes ongoing discomfort, and they don't know how to ask. They want to, sometimes express, the best wishes or something. But no, I'm good. It's of course kind of disfiguring, but it doesn't cause me ongoing discomfort. Um, and I am also not sensitive about asking me about like how it happened or something. If we're talking some other time later and you want to ask, just feel free. I don't know. And then and then it displays something, right? You kind of turned a difficulty into a positive in a demonstrable way, and you could get even better than that by far. But that's a potentially reasonable stable base. And then just doing that, it's kind of a nice demonstration. It's nice icebreaker or something. Absolutely, and also it would be a bit of a personal thing regarding what kind of feels most comfortable for you, Joseph. So if it works for you to tell a joke, the one thing with jokes is that it kind of forces someone to laugh. So I want to be careful about a joke, and then if it's related to scars, they particularly don't want to like not laugh. So I like jokes are kind of good in social situations when you can make one, but not act like you're making one. So if they laugh, good, but if they don't, you just kind of move along, right? But in this case, it kind of forces the joke. So I would be maybe wary about that for that reason. On the other hand, it could work great. Like if it fits Joseph's personality, if it fits the situation, and he could have a few different things that over time, like Joseph has to, depending on the situation, that are more appropriate, right? Kind of accumulate like a little bit of a bucket there, like a, a few things. But there's something about like talking about it in a way that deals with it fairly quickly, but kind of turns into a decent positive. Yeah. What Brian said could be part of the mix, or aspects of it, or any of these statements, including mine for sure. You could take and personalize, or take half of it and add half or whatever, right? So this is great. And you see again how you're welcome, Joseph. Great. So hopefully that was helpful to some degree. You can also see that obviously it leads to goodwill, not any kind of judgment or ill will or looking down in the least. It never would even occur to me, you know, or people here. Great. And it's probably good for now. Maybe I don't know if Joseph wants quite so much attention, but either way, it was a very interesting example, and thank you for that, Joseph. Oh, you're very welcome, Shirley who wrote. Thank you, David. As always, this has been so helpful. Yeah, we'll start winding it down here. About been 2.5 hours. Deborah writes, thanks for another great webinar. Stabilizing your base is so important in life because life repeatedly throws you a curveball, particularly as you grow older. Absolutely. Yeah, that's when obviously, of course, simply put, the health issues can start to come up and everything. And also, yeah, like the health issues for people that you know too, right? And your family. More common as you're older. So it's good to keep hearing about the necessity of reevaluating where you are, right? And that the stipulating allows you to do that, right? When you stipulate a goal, it kind of built into it is that it can change if the environment changes. But as part of that, you can stipulate when the goal won't change too, right? So you don't want to always be thinking about weather, but you can have a quarantined, scheduled planning moment. But you can stipulate or the very nature of stipulating is that it could change based on important new information. But the other part of stipulating is that it doesn't change if there is not important new information, and it often would be less about feedback than about like a new, different type of environmental change, right? That would change your culture goal. You don't really want goals to get changed too much based on feedback in most cases, but you can use your judgment as well. When you think about things clearly, a lot of this stuff kind of answers itself that I'm talking about. James Clark writes, David, Alchemy 17 and having a deeper understanding of resource management allocation is very helpful for my focus. In a way, the development of a great branded website is similar to the development of a child. Yeah, you're very right. In terms of reputation management, structure, value, or instilling and helping that child or website develop itself and show validity against peers or competition. Thank you for the session. I'll re-listen to this again and again. Wonderful, James. Absolutely. And when a quick thought about branding is that one of the things that I think is helpful that I've developed as an idea is over the last few years is that I worry less about brand than about individual personal relationships, backing up allies and so forth. So I'm more focused on building up individual trust relationships than I am on my overall supposed brand out there as like a real entity. A brand is much more vulnerable. It's much more out of your control. And ironically, and it won't do as much for you as individual trust relationships. And what'll happen is you have to prioritize, because I see people prioritize brand and like backstab people or not do things. They'll say, oh, that could hurt my brand, so they don't back up an ally or something like that, when in fact it would have done more for them if they'd kept they'll even break a promise because they're worried about how it'll affect their brand, or break kind of an implied promise, or when instead if you uphold or deepen an individual alliance or trust relationship or anything like that, then that'll again do a lot more for you in a lot of cases than just this like idea of a brand. So that's actually a pretty important idea I found. Shema wrote, what you're saying just now about not judging seems to hold some keys to forgiveness. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because ultimately we want one of two things, or a few things. We want someone to stop doing something they're doing if it's ongoing. We want someone to understand the wrong ideas, including we want everyone to understand wrong ideas so they can fix them. If they're important wrong ideas that are really causing a lot of problems, we prefer people to stop to get them right. If it's so important, big, and having such a negative impact on things and property rights that they have to be stopped in a kind of a powerful way, like jail or killing them or something, then that might have to be. I'm kind of crossing things off so we can see declutters, getting to forgiveness. So there's kind of the practical nature of whether they have to be stopped. Where was I going to here? But yeah, you don't. So right. So the real issue is if someone violates your individual property rights, and then the question is about forgiving them. Yeah, you don't really need to get to the point where you're judging them. You can more in a general way. You can understand this person violated my individual property rights. I'd like that to be reversed if it's plausible to do so. Sometimes it's not. A lot of the time when someone violates you, the go-to idea is, can I quarantine this as best as possible? Right? Often bad stuff is just not reversible, unfortunately. Sometimes it is, but often it's not. And so you ideally want to quarantine it as best as possible. Even if it's ongoing, you could still quarantine it in your life as much as possible, and not have it bleed over into parts of your life and your thinking and your focus when you don't want it to. And then you don't really need to get in a position where you have to judge someone overall. You don't know where they're coming from. If we're in heaven, so to speak, I don't have a view of heaven and hell that's identical to like the kind of real caricatured or whatever version, the kind of simple version, or anything. I don't really have a view of it because it's not. I focus on what I can now, right? Crossing off things about it that can't be true, having a vision of what would be beautiful, um, and so forth. Um, of how existence could be beautiful and such. But anyway, just to speak simplistically and to make a simple point, if everyone was in heaven except for Hitler, who was in hell, then I would be still want to be focused on getting Hitler out into the good place. You see, that would involve some sort of like it wouldn't be a good place if Hitler was still acting like Hitler, right? But but in terms of understanding, dissolving, contradictions, and then getting into the good place, I would want to be focused on that, if that makes any sense. So we want to, and at the same time, I'm perfectly fine with killing him, right? Um, but ultimately, I don't want to overall judge or it's not about that. It's just on a practical sense. Someone like that has to be stopped, sure. But it's not because they don't need to be forgiven because ideally, because you don't have to start with that in the first place, right? We live in a world where we're being violated nonstop because it's systemic within our system, right? With taxes, regulation, and then just people. If we're online, people will violate us, not outside of the government. Just people will pirate us or steal from us in various ways. Um, so we live in a world where it's just so normal to violate that if we get caught up in getting angry and judging in an overall sense, it's just exhausting and it's always counterproductive, and we just don't need it. And it interferes with our ability to judge individual ideas, right, and get ideas straight. So, anyway, yes, this is about violation of bodily property rights. I'm still stuck on total release of it. In case it helps, you just don't know where someone's coming from. People, we can be grateful. You can take presumably just about any child, and if you abuse them right, and I'm not talking about you being abused, I'm talking about whoever abused you, them being abused in some way, including just with ideas, right, and getting the wrong ideas. You could take, let's say, a child and abuse them in the wrong way, and they will, of course, have a strong tendency to be abusive in many cases. And then you can continue with your environment and have that reinforced in various ways. And it's such a powerful default. We all act so much based on our default, right? Alchemy is about getting out underneath it, but now we're like judging someone for not already having figured out all these alchemy ideas and used them already before they abused us, you see? So, um, uh, so that might start to help. It's along those lines that you can start to help. And then plus, when you focus on what you do want in life, and then just think strategically, how much do I want to focus on abuse and the ripple effects of it? Now, your mind is its own thing. It's a mechanism, and you're not fully responsible for it. It itself is based on the past and the environment and so forth and default stuff. So when your mind goes back to this, that's not you being wrong. That's your mind, and you don't have to feel bad about not releasing it if your mind hasn't dissolved it yet. But you, over time, lead your mind to dissolve it by realizing that strategically, at least, often people set goals that are actually compound, complex goals. Often people say, yeah, I want to reach such and such. Like I want to release this this past abuse and the ripple effects of it and the feelings and the judging from. And I want to forgive. So that'll be a goal. But that'll go along with a timeline. It'll go along with I should do it sooner or whether or not you should push or not. Contrast that with a goal where all things being equal, if you just had a choice between if you could push a button or make a decision where, again, everything else is equal regarding your feelings and emotions and how right things seem, and if you could choose whether to have more forgiveness or less, which would you choose? Sometimes you can just narrow a goal down to that rather than a goal to how hard to push. And that's another thing that I want to get more into over time. But there's something freeing about just realizing that a goal can be, hey, if all things are being equal, I'm going to choose one thing rather than another. And then that will constantly move things. And then the more you have a goal to understand, the more it becomes more obvious that you're choosing one thing more than another, and there's less resistance. And if you just dissolve resistance through understanding, then it will come down to choosing the way you want versus the way you don't want. So take that for what it is for now, and then we'll always be continuing in alchemy week after week. Okay, I'll really look to wind down quickly now. Just kind of thank people and so forth. I'm glad you like the distinction about the whiteboard, Shema. Megan writes, alchemy application to relationships, which seem to pretty much always interfere with building on goals. Alchemy application to relationship. Those relationships which seem to pretty much always interfere with your goals. Right. My question is about the need to improve relationships as a goal, so that I can build in an uncluttered way and focus on the important goal at hand. Yeah. Well, Megan, that whole thing where there's a clutter and sometimes an interplay or a sort of contradiction or at least friction. What's the word? I'm looking for a word and it's not coming to me. But tension is, I think, the word, between our relationship goals and our income goals, right? Just to be simple. That is very important, right? The first most important thing is the tension between your self-image set of goals and that whole thing that's actively pulling on things, and income and relationship goals. And the simple answer is you want to basically dissolve your self-image down to something very simple that just basically is built on things that you can know. And if you want to have more of a self-image, you can just build more things that you know, like methods, ways of doing things. That all things being equal, you'd rather someone be better off rather than worse off. That can be part of your self-image, literally. You see, that's what I mean by heuristics and things you can know. Not like geography or something like that. I don't mean your self-image should be based on knowing more Shakespeare, but just on knowing simple basic truths and ways of operating and building from there. Including knowing what you know about internet business and ranking websites can be part of your self-image, but it's based on like methods, and that, well, I don't know if I can rank you, but I know this method, I know I've had this experience and so forth. I don't know for sure whether the method will work on this website, but I know, I have a number of experiences with it working. I understand the principle. I see where it goes, that sort of thing. So that's what I mean by start to fill in black and white. Sometimes you don't know even that a method will work, but you know aspects about the method that are correct, that you do know, like I just indicated. So first thing is we could, if we wanted to say, we could say your relationship with yourself, but whatever, just your self-image and the goals related to that. But then the stuff from other people and what we should do regarding them and how they're pushing and pulling on us with their expectations and stuff, that is a big deal, right? And also turning that to our advantage and just business. It relates to working with people and helping to make income because of the good pushes that we can get from people, both on ourselves and just their own talents, pushing a whole business, right, as an entity forward. So that's why relationships matter so much, and I have a number of unique things to say about that. Okay. Not really going to be able to get much more into answering questions here. Good. You are basically very welcome, guys. Kimberly writes, this is really beautiful, David. Thank you. I'm going to find a way to adapt this for my own situation. Oh, terrific. Terrific. Possibly referring to some of the stuff I talked about, I guess, 15 minutes ago. Maybe it had to do with the scarring. Maybe it had to do with abuse and so forth. But either way, it's a correct statement. Robert wrote, I'm really enjoying listening to and thinking about these things. Love it. I can relate to a lot of things you say. Thanks, David. You're very welcome, Robert. And thanks for all your interaction here and in the Facebook groups. Chris wrote, great interactions here today, David. Heartening that we all seem to get along fairly well and are not quick to judge and have an experiential and knowledge base that is helpful moving forward in our lives and business in a profitable and abundant way. Absolutely. Boy, it's just wonderful what we have at OMG and with how we support each other and everything. Just a beautiful, beautiful thing that you guys do. Jamari wrote, this is very helpful in my Bluetooth headphone, helping me drone along at work. Thank you, David. It's okay, though. I'm on a city on a hill listening to Alchemy. I'll be full-time OMG in no time. Absolute ruthlessness. Yeah, excellent. Keep on with the ruthlessness videos. Thanks for pointing those out last session to people in the 2013 series. I find the idea of not judging other people dangerous. Oh, no. Only in general, in an overall sense. And what that does is it frees you up to judge individual skills, individual talents, as soon as how good you are at swimming. Like, is not generalized, then you can judge it better. Like, and you might say, well, of course we don't judge people overall with how they are at swimming. Oh, we do. If you're on the swim team and you're a bunch of 12-year-old kids, how good someone is at swimming feels like that they're a better person in that context, and it really acts that way. And it bleeds over for sure. It definitely feels more morally good to do better for the team and be better for swimming. You see what I mean? You get this moral component in there. Now, again, the moral component with individual property rights is fine, but you get a moral component literally with like how good you are at swimming. They're treated as if they're more morally good, and that status relates to that. And it overlaps with morals. I'll try to I'll look to not even try, but I'll almost certainly elaborate on that when I talk about relationships and judging. But no, once you get rid of the moral component, except for with individual property rights, and even then, you're judging the individual property rights, but not overall judging the person. Once you get rid of the generalization and the incorrect moral nature, other times when there's no moral nature, then you can judge individual skills so much better. How much better could a swim team work together, and how much better could the coach do if there wasn't this moral general component to how good someone is at swimming, right? If someone says to a child, you're not good at swimming yet, they'd often cry. Why? Because it's getting generalized and moralized. Isn't it much more efficient if we can just rate our skills and rate each other's skills more objectively? You see? So it's dangerous not to, and it's great that you asked this question and put it this way. So I'm not in any way disagreeing with you or scolding you or whatever, but it's dangerous, you see, not like it's dangerous to generalize in a moral sense or generalize in like an overall life talent sense or an overall value of a person sense. Value, moral, it's all tied together. Like the person seems more valuable or higher status based on a restricted thing like how good they are at swimming. And it really happens, and it's all over the place all the time, right? And it's why superiors can't correct their, right? It came up in that example I gave in a recent alchemy with the girl, the Susan, right, in the book who went to pieces when she was criticized. It felt like a moral thing, right, and a value thing. So we definitely want to judge, but we want it to be specific to the thing, and then we can judge much better. Right, and sometimes semantics do have a real impact. I never want it to be about like my use of language or my definition of something, but if the person's own wording for themselves especially means one thing, and if using different wording would mean something different to that other person that's using the term, then it matters for them to use the more proper term for themselves. Same thing if we're talking in a group and what it means to the group. Where I watch out for semantics is imposing my own definition and then trying to force people to use like my wording. That I don't want to do in alchemy or wherever. Like I would only tell one of you guys you're using the wrong word if you yourself said this word means such and such, right? And then you were applying it in a way that it didn't apply. Then I might say, according to your own definition, you're using the wrong word. I wouldn't say, no, this word means that, not what you're saying, right? That would just be like a status play or just incorrect, logically wrong. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the wonderful comments. My goodness. Hardly can read them all, but I'll just appreciate them. Thank you, Darcy, Elke, am I pronouncing that right? Is it Elke? Michael, Long, Brian, Chad, Susanna, Michael, Joseph, Shema, and Chris, and thank you so much, and you're very welcome, and Michael, and of course many other thanks as well that I've missed, Ernie, and Jennifer. Never ends around here. Megan, I appreciate all of you very much, and you're very welcome. Always a pleasure to do this, at least through September. my own little joke there. No, it's great. Almost be as much or more of a pleasure after the obligation is finished. But of course, it's just great. You guys make this a super pleasure to do. Way past what I would have guessed if someone forced me to guess. Thank you, Mike. You're very welcome. Okay, I will end the webinar here, and I will see you guys next week. I know I skipped over a bunch of comments and questions, but of course, we can only do what we can do. And very possibly get back to them in future discussions. You're very welcome, Rick, and very welcome, Suzanne. Enjoy your day as well, and everyone enjoy your weekend. And if it's at all possible, I'll see you guys Monday at 8 p.m. You're very welcome, Deborah.